Happy birthday to our newest, one of our two new selectmen, Bernard Grain. I acknowledge the proper publication and service of the warrant and call on Mr. Slayton for the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I now call on our town clerk to read the roll of deceased town meeting members, after which we will have a moment of silence.
Anthony Andriatis, Constance Austin, Carol Gelb, Maria Rosenthal, Samuel Parkman Shaw.
Thank you. I now call on the town clerk to swear in new town meeting members.
Would all newly elected and re-elected town meeting members please stand and raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will faithfully and impartially discharge all the duties incumbent upon you as a member of town meeting, according to the best of your ability and understanding, agreeable to the rules and regulations of the Constitution and the laws of the Commonwealth, and under rules, regulations, and bylaws made on authority thereon? Please say, I do. I do. Congratulations.
A few of my customary announcements. Please silence your cell phones. I remind you of our seating procedures. Only town meeting members may sit forward of the checkers tables, with the exception of the town staff and speakers may sit in the front row center, and the first two rows on my right are reserved for members of the press, and handicapped town meeting members may sit anywhere in the front row. I remind all speakers to announce your name, your precinct, and if there's any conflict of interest that relating to your remarks, you should disclose them before you commence your remarks. Our time limits are 5 minutes per speaker unless prior arrangements have been made with the moderator. Now, over the years, to the extent that I knew that somebody was a doctor, be it an MD or a doctor of PhD, I have announced that person as Dr. So-and-so. However, the woods out there are full of doctors and lawyers and professors and others who are entitled to an honorary address. And so, henceforth, I'm going to announce everybody as Mr. or Ms. unless you make a special... let me say that those of you who wish to do so may make a special request to be addressed as doctor, and I will, with only some reluctance, honor that request. Couple of announcements on forthcoming events. The Town Meeting Members Association will hold its annual meeting on June 11 at 7 p.m., room 103 in Town Hall. And the 37th Annual Coolidge Corner Arts Festival will be held this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. We will take the articles in the budget in the order in which they appear in the combined reports. There is one exception. We will debate Articles 15 and 16, which have similar subject matter, together. And after the debate, we will vote first on Article 15 and then on Article 16. It's also been suggested that we make a change in our electronic voting procedures. And what we have done so far for the last 3 years that we've had electronic voting is that I've asked at the beginning of the period for casting votes, I've asked those voting yes to stand and press 1, and then those voting no to stand and press 2. And this is an inconvenience to many of you who have your laps full of computers and combined reports and so forth. And unless there's a significant desire among town meeting members to continue that practice, I propose that when we get to the 40-second voting period, I just remind you what buttons to press and not have you stand and go through that routine. The purpose originally was to simulate to some extent a standing vote so that you could see how your fellows were voting. But we're scrolling through screens up here, and if you're really curious, you can find out by following the screens. So let me have a show of hands of all those who feel strongly that we should continue the practice of standing for voting. Okay, I see only a few hands, so that one is history. Now, I'd like to have our usual electronic vote dry run and remind you only that you, on your handheld device, press 1 for a yes, 2 for a no, and 3 for an abstention. Do not press any of these in the top row, just 1, 2, 3. And the resolution on which I'd like you to vote is resolved that the Red Sox should change managers. And whenever you're ready. Yep. Okay. 40 seconds, press 1 for a yes for that resolution, 2 for no, and 3 for an abstention. The motion fails with a vote of 37 in favor, 83 against, and 60 abstentions. And if any of you have not attempted to vote and your vote was not recorded, please see one of our IT representatives. Ms. Orsini? Okay, we proceed now to...
Mr. Moderator?
You have a question?
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm not out of order.
Who are you, sir?
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3.
Yeah.
With respect to the order that the warrant articles will be presented, I'd like to ask if warrant Article 13 and warrant Article 14 could be taken first on Thursday evening to accommodate a school child who will be speaking and his mother. And allowing him to go first would let him go home and do his homework.
Okay, Ms. Gilman proposes that we fix the time for our debate on Articles 13 and 14 to the first thing on Thursday evening. Requires a vote of town meeting. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, that motion carries, and we'll deal with Articles 13 and 14 first thing Thursday. We proceed now to the articles, and Article 1, the motion on page 1-2 is that the town establish that the number of measurers of wood and bark be 2, appointed by the selectmen. Mr. Spiegel, I regret to announce, is not with us this evening to give his usual spirited presentation in support of this article, and I call on Mr. Green.
Well, folks, my first warrant article as a selectman. Okay.
And you didn't tell us your name, Mr. Green.
Oh, God. First article, and I screw it up. Bernard Green, Board of Selectmen. Well, let me go back with my little speech. My first article as a Board of Selectmen. And wouldn't you know, it would be wood and bark. At any rate, historically, Article 20 of the November 2000 Special Town Meeting requires that this be the first article at each annual town meeting, and usually we have the humorous thoughts of Stanley Spiegel. Unfortunately, he's not here, and I can't make up for, or I can't replicate what he is able to do, so I'll just read it straight. It calls for the selectmen to appoint 2 measurers of wood and bark. The selectmen recommend favorable action by a vote of 5-0, taken on March 17, 2015, on the vote offered by the advisory committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benka.
Carla Benka, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, speaking for the advisory committee. Would that Stanley Spiegel were here to offer the committee's recommendation. Alas, due to illness, he is not. So, by a vote of 16-1 with no abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on Article 1. Let's leave it at that.
On the motion on page 1-2, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 2 relates to collective bargaining agreements. We have none of these before us tonight, so no action is moved by Ms. Heller, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. Those in favor of no action, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 3. The motion under Article 3 is at the bottom of page 3-1 that the town authorize the town's treasurer to enter into compensating balance agreements, moved by Mr. Franco, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. Mr. Franco.
Good evening. Ben Franco for a unanimous Board of Selectmen. Compensating balance agreements are agreements between the town and a bank in which the town agrees to maintain a minimum balance and a non-interest-bearing account. In return, the bank agrees to provide the town with certain banking services free of charge. This article is placed on the warrant annually in order to provide the town treasurer with the flexibility to enter into these agreements if he determines it is in the best interest of Brookline. The article is necessary because the treasurer cannot enter into a compensating balance agreement without the express consent of town meeting, and this body has routinely provided that consent since 1987. Historically, the treasurer has not utilized his ability to enter into compensating balance agreements. But in this era of higher banking fees and lower interest rates, compensating balance agreements have become an important tool in the treasurer's toolbox. The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends favorable action on Article 3.
Mr. Doty, do you wish to add anything?
From here?
Sure.
The Advisory Committee unanimously recommends favorable action on Article 3.
Thank you. On the motion at the bottom of page 3-1, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 4. There are two motions, actually three motions under this article are found on page 4-2. The recommendation is for no action on Part 1, for an affirmative vote on the Runkle School and Heath School votes, and moved by Mr. Franco and seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. Mr. Franco again. And Mr. Koff, would you please come to the microphone if you're present?
Good evening. I am still Ben Franco from the Board of Selectmen. Article 4 is an annual submission to the annual town meeting warrant. Its submission is required by Article 2.1.4 of the bylaws. The article serves two purposes: to provide town meeting with an update on spending associated with previously approved projects, and to seek rescission of authority town meetings previously granted to borrow funds associated with capital projects that have been completed. The update on expenditures associated with previously approved capital and special appropriations, that's Part 1 of the article, does not require a favorable vote, a vote of favorable action, excuse me. This is because you've already received the information. The comptroller included tables that detail up-to-date expenditures in the warrant that was mailed to you earlier this month. Parts 2 and 3 of the article ask town meeting to rescind remaining unneeded authority to borrow for two capital projects that have been completed, improvements to the Runkle and Heath schools. On the topic of the Runkle School, town meeting authorized borrowing of $29,100,000 to make improvements to the Runkle School. The state contributed $10,359,558 to the project, and when the town received the MSBA's contribution, the equivalent amount of authorization to borrow was automatically rescinded. The town spent $18,730,000 of town funds on the Runkle renovation, leaving $10,442 of unused authorization to borrow. Part 2 of Article 4 asks the body to rescind the authorization in this sum. On the topic of the Heath School, town meeting authorized $8,500,000 of borrowing to complete improvements to that school. The state reimbursed the town for $2,871,634 of expenses, thereby rescinding the equivalent amount of authorized borrowing. The town spent $5,240,000 on improvements, leaving $388,366 of unused authorization. Part 3 of the article proposes town meeting rescind this unneeded authorization to borrow. The selectmen unanimously support the rescission of unexpended and unneeded remaining authorizations to borrow for completed projects at the Runkle and Heath schools. In summary, the board recommends a vote of no action on Part 1 of the article and a vote of favorable action on Parts 2 and 3. The exact motion for favorable action can be found on page 4-3 of your combined reports. Thank you.
Mr. Downey?
Dennis Dowdy, Precinct 3, speaking for Unanimous Advisory Committee. This article is annually submitted to close out special appropriations and/or rescind any unneeded bond authorizations. The rescission of bond authorizations requires town meeting action. This year, there are two bond authorizations with unused borrowings. The John D. Runkle School project, authorized as Item 58 of Section 3 of Article 4 of the 2009 special town meeting, was authorized for borrowings of $29,100,000, state funds of $10,359,558, and borrowings of $18,730,000 leave $10,442 of unused authorization. The Heath School project, authorized as Item 68 of Section 13 of Article 9 of the 2011 annual town meeting, was authorized for borrowings of $8,500,000. State funds of $2,871,634, and borrowings of $5,240,000 leave $368,366 of unused authorization. And the advisory committee unanimously recommends favorable action on Article 4, which asks the town to rescind the unused portion of each of these respective bond authorizations, and unanimously recommends no action on Article 4 relating to special appropriations.
Thank you, Mr. Koff.
Yes, I found that the...
Who are you?
Larry Koff, Precinct 3. Thank you. I found that the capital costs are presented without any square foot analysis. I think it would be helpful to understand and be able to compare the costs of these different school projects, both within the town and with the costs of facilities in other towns. I'd like the school committee to give us a report on the square foot costs of each of these projects.
Mr. Rowe?
Thank you. Peter Rowe, Deputy Superintendent of Schools. Let me just look here. The total spending for the Runkle School was $29,058,000 for a 105 square foot project, which comes out to $276 a square foot. The Heath School is slightly different in that we added 6 classrooms, expanded the cafeteria and the library for $8.3 million. The total square footage of the building is 81,000, so that comes out to 102 square feet. But in terms of the additional square footage, it was probably closer to 30,000 square feet, which brings this number just about in line with $300 per square foot of Runkle. Plus at Heath, there was some additional ADA accommodation and modification made to the entire building. So there were some services for the whole building, but it was mainly addition of 6 classrooms and the other adjusted areas.
Yes, Mr. Koff.
I hope that we can have a similar analysis for the Devotion project. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motions on page 4-2, we'll have a single vote on all 3 of these motions unless there's a motion to divide the question, seeing nobody rise for that purpose. On the 3 motions on page 4-2, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 5. Article 5 relates to the payment of bills of prior years, unpaid bills of prior years. There are no such bills before us. No action is moved by Mr. Lynn Jones, seconded by Mr. Wyszynski. Those in favor of no action under this article, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 6. The motion offered under Article 6 is at the top of page 6-2, that the town elect to establish additional property tax exemptions for the coming fiscal year. Moved by Ms. Daly, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. Ms. Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nancy Daly for the Board of Selectmen. Article 6 authorizes the doubling of some very modest property tax exemptions for the blind, very low-income, elderly, disabled veterans, and several other categories, which are established by the Commonwealth. The Assessor's Office estimates that somewhere between 100 and 120 individuals will be able to take advantage of these exemptions, and the total cost to the town will be approximately $54,000 for the fiscal year. We've been doubling these state exemptions since 1989, which is the maximum we are allowed to go on them. The funds to cover these exemptions will come out of the tax overlay account. So the Board of Selectmen recommends favorable action by a 5-0 vote.
Mr. Doggett.
John Doggett, Precinct 13, speaking for the Advisory Committee. The Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on this warrant article.
Thank you. On the motion at the top of page 6-2, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 7. Motion offered under Article 7 is on page 1 of the green supplement, relating to a transfer in the Public Works budget that will be described to you by the speakers. Moved by Mr. Wyszynski, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. Mr. Wyszynski.
Neil Wyszynski speaking for the Board of Selectmen. It's customary to have articles in the fall and the spring warrant making adjustments to the current fiscal year. So this is for the current fiscal year, not for the next fiscal year, which we'll be discussing in the next warrant article. So I think we had a little snow this year. And so here's where we have to pay for all the snow removal we did. The total bill is over budget $3.233 million in round dollars, and 394,000 of it will come from hopefully FEMA. 340,000 are coming from internal transfers within the Department of Public Works. 1.4 million is coming from the reserve fund, which I believe the advisory committee has already voted, and that is not before town meeting. What is before town meeting is how to cover the remaining $1.1 million. We're fortunate in Brookline to have reserves to handle this extraordinary expense, and this year we're proposing, and we're hoping you'll vote favorable action, on allocating a surplus in the overlay reserve for this purpose. And the overlay reserve, the overlay reserve is managed by the Board of Assessors, and they can declare surpluses when there's little or no risk of having to use the money. The money is used to cover things like what we just heard in the last warrant article, exemptions, but also appeals regarding tax assessments. So the assessors have declared $1.165 million. This warrant article allocates $1.1 million of that to the snow and ice account. The remaining will just go into free cash to be used in future years. So we hope you'll vote favorable action on the motion before you.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett.
Mr. Moderator. John Doggett, Precinct 13, speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. This year we've had one item, snow and ice budget, which needs augmenting in a big way, as Selectman Wyszynski has outlined to you. The DPW traditionally budgets a lower number than expected amount for snow removal, which enables them to invoke Chapter 44 of the Mass General Laws to permit more expenditure than has been budgeted. You've heard of the number, it's 3.2 million. It's a lot of snow and it's a lot of dollars. Funding for the deficit, as Selectman Wyszynski said, is coming from FEMA, some salary, DPW wage and salary accounts due to unfilled positions, some 340,000, a reserve fund transfer of 1.4 million. The 1.1 million left over deficit that needs to be funded is coming from the overlay reserve account. The Advisory Committee, by unanimous vote of 19-0 with no abstentions, recommends favorable action on the motion offered by the Selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion on page 1 of the Green Supplement, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 8. This is the budget article, and the motion offered by the Advisory Committee is found on the blue supplement, pages 31 to the end. It's moved by Mr. Lynn Jones, seconded by Ms. Benka, and the way we'll proceed is as follows. We'll first hear from the Advisory Committee, next from the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Wyszynski. We will then deal with portions of the budget in the following manner. We'll deal first with the conditions of appropriations, which are found on page 31 to 35 of the blue supplement, paragraphs 1 to 12 of the budget. We will then deal with special appropriations numbered 35 to 73 that are found on pages 35, I'm sorry, to 40 of the blue supplement. As we go through these, if you have comments or questions, please come to a microphone as we approach the special appropriation question. And if you will, refer to the chart that the town administrator passed out showing for each of these special appropriations where in the budget article the more complete explanation is, and you may get your questions answered in that more elaborate explanation. If you don't, then come to a microphone and I'll call on you when we reach the item on which you have a question or a comment. After we finish item 73, the last of the special appropriations, we'll deal with free cash, paragraph 14 at the bottom of page 40 of the blue supplement, and then proceed to the budget tables, which are found on the first 3 pages of the 3 pages of the blue budget, entitled, surprisingly enough, Budget Table 1 to 3. There are some votes that, particularly a vote, an item on which there's been some controversy, where I'll take a vote in the middle of the budget consideration. There are also a number of appropriations, 67 through 73 to be exact, which requires a 2/3 vote, and I will take a 2/3 vote on each of those items as we proceed through the end of the special appropriations. At the end of the budget, when we finish the town and school appropriations and special budget items on the chart, we will have an omnibus budget vote, yea or nay. So I now call on Mr. Lynn Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Sean Lynn Jones, Precinct 1, speaking for the Advisory Committee. It's been an interesting time to become chair of the Advisory Committee. During the town's debates over the override and other issues, we've had some vigorous debates ourselves and what diplomats like to call frank exchanges of opinions. Mr. Boers didn't tell me all about how things would work out this particular budget season. But since I've become chair, I've started listening to the Rolling Stones as I drive to and from advisory committee meetings. On the way to the meetings, I listen to "You Can't Always Get What You Want," which is a very good message for town finance committees to heed. And on the way back, I've been listening to "Gimme Shelter." Now, when the town administrator heard this, he said that he's also a fan of the Rolling Stones. Who knew? But he's been singing, he said at least, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." Well, Mel, just remember, it's only rock and roll. But I hope you're singing a different tune these days. When it comes to the town's budget, we're certainly singing a new song. For the past 2 years, we've had transitional or bridge budgets that we knew were unsustainable. With the passage of the May 2015 override, we will see at least a few years of budgetary stability. Brookline schools will have the resources to deal with growing enrollment without sacrificing educational quality. The town also will avoid cuts to important services, but major fiscal challenges loom on the horizon. First, the implications of the override. It's had a major effect on our fiscal situation, including, most notably, much higher revenue growth in fiscal 16 and beyond. Because of the override, we'll collect an additional $6.2 million in property taxes. Overall, we'll have a property tax revenue increase of 6.9%. 3.4% would have happened without the override, plus 3.5% without, plus 3.4% with. And overall, our revenue will go up 6.1% over fiscal 2015. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude, it was only 2.7% increase from 14 to 15. We'll have increased spending on the schools to the tune of about $5.5 million in the first year, fiscal 16, from override funds, with an additional approximately $1.5 million in fiscal 17 and beyond. Enabling the schools to address the needs of growing enrollment, to avoid cuts to key programs, and to fund investments in technology. We'll also avoid the $682,000 in cuts to town departments that were included in the fiscal year 16 financial plan, cuts that were debated extensively by the advisory committee because we thought they were unjustified, but we recognize it would have been challenging to find funds to restore them if the override had failed. We also have a forecast of balanced budgets now from fiscal 16 through fiscal 18. Of course, this comes at a cost in terms of increased tax payments by Brookline residents to the tune of about $364 for the medium single-family residents, $111 for condominiums, and $797 for commercial properties. Also, although it's not really in this year's budget, other revenues and efficiencies starting in fiscal 17 and 18 will yield another $2.2 or $2.3 million in revenue to be devoted to the schools, and this will mainly come from the increase in parking meter revenues and the increased trash fee combined with efficiencies from going to pay-as-you-throw. Overall, we have a $250 million budget going forward. It's very difficult to sum up a $250 million budget briefly, so I'm going to talk about a few key highlights. First, one that will have an impact on many, if not all, many residents of Brookline is pay-as-you-throw. We're going to be moving, work in progress to a toter system, and I'm going to leave it to Neil Wyszynski of the Board of Selectmen to sum up the details on how this is going to operate, what kind of expenditures will be necessary to start up, and what kind of savings will be realized. I'll just say that this is a case where we're looking to increase recycling as well as to increase efficiency. Pay-as-you-throw and automation go hand in hand. The advisory committee also spent a lot of time and listened to a lot of public input on the question of increasing the FTEs for preservation planners from 1.8 to 2.0. This was a very small item in terms of dollars, but overwhelmingly was the one that attracted the most public interest. We felt this was necessary and overdue given the number of LHDs, local historic districts, we now have, with another one likely to be established this evening, or at least at this town meeting. And we realize that 2.0 FTEs may not be adequate, but it's a step in the right direction, and we'll review the situation in the future. As always, benefit costs are a major share of the budget, amounting to 23% of the total appropriation, about the same as last year. These are not the budget buster they used to be, but still note that we're seeing an increase in health insurance costs of 8.3%. It's 11% of the total budget. When it comes to OPEBs, healthcare for retired employees, we continue to aggressively fund our unfunded liability. But we only have $25 million in our OPEB fund, and we have a liability of about $200 million. We'd like to pat ourselves on the back because we're doing more than almost any other community. We're adding $3.5 million a year to our OPEB fund. On the other hand, we have a liability that dwarfs that of many other communities, including the other AAA-rated, bond-rated communities. So we've got to keep up the good work here. We have a similar story on pensions, with an unfunded liability of almost $200 million, and we're contributing $18.7 million this year to bring it down, up 4.6% over 2015. Turning to the school budget, basically, the 5.5 or so million in additional funds from the revenue from the override this year will be devoted to changes directly related to enrollment, increases in professional support staff to make up for the last several years in which we've held that constant, increases related to new programs, particularly in the area of technology, and increases related to managing the use of Old Lincoln to house devotion students. The advisory committee recognizes that the schools have taken some major steps toward efficiency. We hope they'll continue to listen and continue to engage in that conversation. Most of all, we hope that the school budget document will be revised and improved to make it more transparent. And we outline a number of very specific steps to do that in the report, in the combined reports. The CIP's highlight this year, of course, is the devotion school renovation, which will cost over $120 million. about 46% from the 46 million from the general fund bond, 45 million from the debt exclusion we voted on in May, and approximately 28 million from the MSBA. Of all the other CIP items, so far the most controversial has been item 40 regarding a study of the parking lot, Center Street East lot. There is an amendment that would insert the words "with neighborhood input" to this study. And by a vote of 17-0 with 1 abstention, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on that amendment. Looking ahead, however, even though this budget represents a lot of continuity, preservation of town programs, and catch up with enrollment and on other fronts for the schools, we face some enormous fiscal challenges. Despite the infusion of revenue from the override, there are at least 3 fiscal challenges that are going to emerge in the next 3 to 5 years. The advisory committee feels that it's important to begin planning for them now. We've had a vigorous debate over the override, and instead of getting ready to fight that battle when we have another override vote, we should start thinking of our long-term integrated plan for setting priorities and dealing with these challenges. The first of them is the potential for another general operating override. The Override Study Committee looked 3 years ahead and concluded that after that 3-year interval, another override would probably be necessary. The very preliminary 5-year fiscal forecast from the schools suggests that there will be a deficit that starts to emerge in fiscal 19 or 20. That's a very preliminary forecast. It rests on very conservative revenue estimates, and it doesn't assume any changes to reduce that override. It still should warn us, though, that our budget may be stabilized in the short run. We face medium-term challenges. On the capital side, there are 2 significant problems that aren't fully addressed by the CIP. In fact, we basically have a to be determined for these 2 items. The first is the potential 9th elementary school. We've gone back and forth. We've had B-space. We've had other debates. The pendulum may be swinging back toward a 9th elementary school as opposed to expand in place, given that the MSBA has essentially ruled out the Driscoll expansion. This is a story that will unfold in the next month to year, but there are preliminary estimates that suggest a 9th elementary school would cost in the 50 to 60 million range, looking at the Override Study Committee's projections, site acquisition costs if necessary, and the assumption that costs of any school construction project always rise to more than you initially expect. And this is not covered in any way by the CIP now and would require a debt exclusion. Brookline High School renovation and expansion is in the concept study phase. We don't have firm figures, but we only have $35 million in the CIP, which will clearly be insufficient. Some reports suggest a cost of well over $100 million. We'll have to wait and see what it is, but no matter what it is, it's not going to be $35 million. So we face potential operating budget strains, we face capital issues. We don't have any easy answers for these problems. For over 20 years, we've had efficiency studies and override study committees that recommend numerous efficiencies. Most of them have been implemented. Town staff has done a great job. The schools have incorporated some of them. There just isn't much low-hanging fruit left. The Override Study Committee offered, the usual suspects of some of these cuts. For example, reducing the manning on fire apparatus from 4 to 3, eliminating one of the 7 fire companies, and possibly allowing maximum class sizes to rise even further, or curtailing the METCO and materials fee programs. If the past is any guide, we'll be reluctant to revisit these recommendations, but they are likely to be on the agenda for any future efficiency or override study committees. We always like to look to the possibility of expanding the commercial tax base. It's the easy answer. It generates money, a lot of money, and it doesn't impose additional burdens on the schools or other services. It's great that we have 3 major projects that are going to generate millions of dollars in new revenue. The hotel at the Red Cab site, Brookline Place, and the hotel retail residential complex at Cleveland Circle in the former cinema site. Unfortunately, all of these are just about accounted for in our revenue forecasts. Also, they all took about a decade to bring online. Furthermore, there's nothing else of this magnitude in the pipeline. The town staff, the Planning and Community Development Department, the residents who worked on various committees all deserve enormous credit, and they're going to be continuing to work on these. And EDAB is even having a meeting on June 8th to look at new ways. But I don't think we can rely on a major bailout from the next commercial project. We're already banking that revenue. One thing we can do, which the advisory committee recommends give very serious consideration to, is to reduce the health insurance premium costs that the town pays on behalf of its employees. Under our current negotiated agreement, which will expire at the end of this year, the town covers 83% of the cost, while the employees cover 17%. That's a very generous split. Statewide average is closer to 70%, 30%. Each 1% reduction in the town share saves about $270,000, and that will continue to go up as health insurance costs rise. And so if you just get it down to 75%, you're looking at a $2 million annual saving. Get it down to 70%, maybe $3.5 million. All of these changes would have to be negotiated, but the advisory committee looks at this as a priority. There are 4 principles that we should bear in mind as we go forward in trying to confront our fiscal challenges. Number 1, we have to consider capacity to pay. Over the long run, when increases in the cost of government exceed the increases in the income of Brookline's residents, we are on an unsustainable track. When he was still Deputy Town Administrator, Sean Cronin gave a presentation that showed how the cost of government had increased in Brookline over the last 25 years or so. Impressively, it was only about 3.7% average on an annual basis. Sometimes it was higher, sometimes it was lower. Overrides obviously drove up that percentage, but they were offset by lower percentages. I think we should continue to calculate that cost of government index as we look at the burden of the current override, potential future overrides, the debt exclusion for devotion, and others for the 9th elementary school and the high school, if necessary. It gives us a yardstick for measuring how we're doing compared to how we've done in the past. Second, we need a much more integrated approach to long-term planning. The town, the schools, the selectmen, and the advisory committee need to coordinate their efforts so that separate and incremental decisions do not make our budget outlook even more complicated. We're going to have to set some priorities and make some trade-offs. And as the song goes, you can't always get what you want. Third, we need transparency and accountability. One of our recommendations is for much more transparency in the school budget and more information to be provided to the advisory committee school subcommittee on whether school programs are actually cost-effective. And in their future forecasts of the budget, the schools are starting to try to take into account whether their programs will actually yield savings by putting that in the budget as a future saving that will be a result of the current investment in additional spending on a new program, and that's a welcome development. Most important, we're going to need an open process on not only the fiscal issues, but the school siting issues, the capital issues, that will guarantee that all voices are heard and that we can be confident that the key issues are being addressed. Finally, and most importantly, we need more compromise and consensus. As I said, neither side in the recent override debate should start planning to fight the next battle. Instead, we should begin working together to fight the fiscal challenges we face. If everyone says it's my way or the highway, we're headed for a road trip to nowhere. Now, to wrap up, Brookline has made its decisions about the 2015 override. Those decisions will shape the budgets for fiscal 16 and beyond. The long-term fiscal challenges, posed mainly, but not entirely, by continued growth in school enrollment, mean that more important decisions to be made. Making those decisions will test our imagination, our resources, our will, and most probably our patience. The choices we make will have a major impact on the character of our community. We should make them as wisely as possible, with our eyes wide open. The advisory committee, first of all, thanks the town administrator, deputy town administrator, selectmen, department heads, school committee, and central administration of the public schools of Brookline for their work on the fiscal 16 budget and their assistance to the advisory committee during the budget process. We also give particular thanks to the override study committee. Even though we've had the override vote, we shouldn't forget their extraordinary dedication, and we commend their report to anyone interested in more information on Brookline's fiscal challenges and choices. There are a lot of ideas there whose time has not yet passed. By a vote of 17-0 with 5 abstentions, the advisory committee submits the fiscal 2016 town budget with a recommendation of favorable action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wyszynski.
Neil Wyszynski for the Board of Selectmen. Ms. Lynn Jones ended with some thank yous. I'm going to start with some thank yous. We've had a little turnover on the Board of Selectmen. So first I'd like to thank Betsy DeWitt, who was on the board for 9 years, 4 of which as chair. And prior to that, she served on the advisory committee as chair. And after a long period of service to the town, she has retired from the town. We may see her back. The next thank you is to our new town meeting member, Ken Goldstein, who was on the Board of Selectmen for 6 years, 1 as chair. Prior to that, he was on the planning board for many years. He hasn't retired from the town completely. He is one of your colleagues now, so I think he deserves a round of applause. And I'd like to give a special thank you to Harry Bors. Harry was chair. Harry was chair of the advisory committee for about a dozen years, maybe more by my count, and I can only aspire to run meetings as well as Harry. He's always thoughtful, fair, and had a way of finding solutions to tough problems. I served with him for over a decade and am honored to call him a friend. And now a confession, Harry was the person who got me involved in town government, so he's the reason I'm standing up here, so maybe you should boo him for that. And I'd like to welcome new selectmen Nancy Heller and Bernard Green. I can't recall the last time we had 2 new selectmen at the same time, and this is the first time in my memory that the entire Board of Selectmen has previously served on the advisory committee, and I think that speaks well to the emphasis we place in Brookline on fiscal stewardship. I also share a thank you to the Override Study Committee. That committee met literally hundreds of times, either as a full committee or in subcommittees for about a year. The town owes all its members a giant debt of gratitude. And, I'll just recognize Peter Rowe, who was before you, after 20-something years with the town and 30-something years of public service. He's retiring at the end of this month, the end of June. As you all know, we just concluded a hotly contested election, the first in many years. While in the heat of the campaign, we may not have thought so, stepping back, but now that it's over, I can say that I believe that contested elections make our town and our democracy stronger. It forces proponents to publicly defend their positions in debate to the media, and to one-on-one voter encounters. It draws voters into the process who might not otherwise participate. It's my hope that a new generation of residents, energized by the election, now becomes active in town government, either by running for town meeting, applying to become a member of a board or commission, or by running for townwide office. We have a volunteer government which can only thrive with broad participation. And to those who led the campaign for a better override, especially my friend Dick Benka and Override Study Committee member Carol Levin, I also say thank you. Thank you for your spirited advocacy and raising some valid and important questions about the future. I'd also like to thank Pam Lodish. I'd also like to thank Pam Lodish and Marilise for putting themselves out there and running strong campaigns for selectmen. It isn't easy. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Sandra Stotsky for putting herself in the school committee race. As I said, contested elections ultimately keep us stronger as a town. With respect to the override, the voters have made a choice. As Mr. Lynn Jones said, that brings us both short-term and medium-term stability. As you know, the override was based on a 3-year financial plan and model. Prior overrides were similarly based on 3-year finance plans, and we've been able to make them last much longer. That was the case in 2008. That 3-year plan lasted 7, despite this Great Recession and the enrollment growth that followed. We'll probably face challenges this time as well. If enrollment growth continues beyond the 3 years of the financial plan, so will the pressures which resulted in this month's override will continue. The devotion debt exclusion also does not solve our high school or elementary school expansion needs. Brookline has been able to make overrides last due to careful fiscal planning, including prudent financial policies which are re-examined periodically, giving us our AAA bond rating, which keeps our borrowing costs low, strict cost controls on the town side, cost controls on the school side too. Until passage of the override, we met the enrollment increase by some increases in the number of classrooms, but by starving perimeter supports. On the revenue side, we've encouraged expansion of our commercial tax base and have had infrequent Proposition 2.5 overrides. We've done operational overrides 3 times in the past 20 years, and with each time we've taken a deep dive look at our policies and operations to determine whether there are alternatives to tax increases. This time was no different. Each time we go through the exercise, the choices get more difficult. Each time there are fewer new things we can do. The Override Study Committee made numerous recommendations to further strengthen our fiscal situation. The Board of Selectmen is committed to implementing as many of these recommendations as possible over time. The override, remember, was just one piece of our 3-year fiscal plan. It goes together with fee increases and efficiencies, both of which are essential components of the plan. These components didn't receive as much attention during our discussions over the past few months, and here is where we see some of the immediate challenges we face. For example, as Mr. Lynn Jones mentioned, one key saving over time will come from the recommendation to convert to a hybrid pay-as-you-throw solid waste system. This has been studied for years and has been a major effort of our Solid Waste Advisory Committee and our Department of Public Works. This conversion is going to affect every household using town trash collection. For the first time, if you generate more waste that can fit into a toter, you will need to pay. The exact details are still yet to be determined, but we'll be commencing a public process, including hearings within the next month or 2. We hope to have the system operational by next summer. I'm sure you're going to hear from your constituents about this change. Other ways to limit our costs may affect our employees. Personnel costs consume almost 80% of our budget. Strict cost control has been a hallmark of our operations for many years. A key finding of the 2008 Override Study Committee was that we must look at the total costs of compensation when entering into collective bargaining agreements. This would include employee benefits and future obligations. With formal voted commitments from both the School Committee and Board of Selectmen, this has been a guiding principle for how we approach our collective bargaining agreements since 2008. One of our biggest challenges in looking at the total cost and compensation has been the growth of our health insurance costs over the past decades. As you know, we reached an agreement in FY 2011 for our employees to enter the State Group Insurance Commission. This move has saved the town and its employees millions of dollars in premium costs. After the move, health insurance inflation has held at a reasonable rate until now. The GIC has announced large premium increases for the current year, which we project will increase our health insurance costs by almost 7%. As Mr. Lynn Jones has stated, the town's share of health insurance premiums is out of line with our neighbors. So to our employees, I say, yes, we're committed to paying fair compensation, but we must stay mindful of the total costs. I mentioned earlier that we've been actively encouraging expansion of our commercial tax base as a strategy to reduce pressure on our residential tax base. New growth is one of the few revenue tools that allows for tax growth beyond Proposition 2.5 limits. Commercial growth doesn't demand services like schools that residential growth demands. As Mr. Lynn Jones mentioned, our efforts in this area have been led by the Economic Development Advisory Board. ably headed by co-chairs Paul Sainer and Ann Myers. After many, many years of effort, 3 projects, as you heard, are either under construction, about to begin construction, or are in the final phases of permitting. And these are the Red Cab site over on Route 9, 2 Brookline Place, and the Cleveland Circle Hotel. The project at 2 Brookline Place alone is projected to add something like $2 million per year to our tax base. But look how long and how much effort and process we needed to engage in to make these projects a reality. Now look around town and ask yourself, where will the next project be? The answer isn't obvious, and given the lead time to bring a project to fruition, the likelihood of having this tool available on a substantial scale to assist in new growth beyond the current projects is small. And as Mr. Lynn Jones mentioned, EDAB is sponsoring a workshop on June 8th called Planning for a Changing Brookline to begin the thinking and planning for a broader approach towards redevelopment of our commercial districts. In the past, we've done it kind of project by project and changing zoning specifically for that project. This time, we're looking at a broader approach with a focus on small to medium-sized parcels, and we invite you all to participate. A slowdown of commercial tax growth will only increase the pressures on our residential tax base as we go forward. Now let me turn to the 2 big capital challenges over the next 3 to 8 years: the high school expansion and the expansion of our elementary capacity, possibly to include the addition of a 9th elementary school. I'll highlight a number of things that are happening. First, the town recently submitted a statement of interest seeking Massachusetts School Building Authority participation and cost sharing in our planned high school expansion. We expect to hear sometime this fall as to whether the MSBA will participate. The town has also engaged a firm which is now performing a study of public and privately owned sites for possible locations of a 9th elementary school, which were outside the scope of the B-Space study of sites performed almost 2 years ago. The schools also engaged a consultant to look at the high school program so that any school building project follows what and how we teach in our schools. Looking ahead, the CIP before you includes a strategic asset plan, that's item 39, for this year, and the budget book includes for fiscal 17 a planning analysis of large parcels. These studies were recommended by the Override Study Committee to augment and improve our long-term planning processes and inform our discussion of options. In approaching these issues as a community, we're going to be asking ourselves some hard questions. For the high school, we'll be asking questions like, how big should one high school be? Should we or could we have a second high school? Can we have a large high school that preserves the current experience and quality? Can the current campus handle the influx of students, staff, and their vehicles? How much will the expansion cost? And how can we protect against project scope creep and consequent cost escalation? For the elementary schools, we'll be asking similar questions, plus how much redistricting are we willing to have, and can an alternative model, such as a magnet school, work in Brookline? A new question: are we potentially willing to engage in an eminent domain taking, which requires a 2/3 vote of this body, town meeting? Such a taking could be friendly or an unfriendly taking. This sounds like some of the questions asked during the B-Space process, but let me assure you tonight that our public process will not replay B-Space. In order for us to find creative solutions to these questions and challenges, we need to have space to think creatively, and we'll need all of you to be constructive participants in that thinking. I know that we can all keep the best interests of the town front and center, but it isn't always easy. First, we need to put aside narrow self-interest. We can hope that doesn't come into play too often in governmental decision-making, but then again, we live in the real world. We need to be clear about the interests of the constituency or constituencies that we represent. After all, everyone in this room is elected to do that important job. The broader interests of the town don't always align with our other interests. Our challenge is going to be somehow align all these interests so we can make the best decisions for all of us and Brookline in the future. Barney Frank said something early this year that has stuck with me. He said, "The only person who's run for elected office that I've agreed with 100% of the time is myself, before I held elected office." I would ask that as we move forward and begin to have these discussions, you listen, keep an open mind, and that you stay respectful of alternative points of view. By participating in the debate and listening to all points, you may even find that you wind up in a different place than where you were at the beginning of the discussion. The tone and quality of the discussion will surely affect the quality of the decision. Now back to earth. The advisory committee has presented a strong, balanced town budget, one that respects our financial policies, provides the services our citizens expect, and honors the commitments made during the override discussion. So with that, on behalf of the unanimous Board of Selectmen, I urge you to vote favorable action on the advisory committee's motion, including the recent inclusion in item 14 for neighborhood input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wyszynski. On the budget motion, which commences at the top of page 31 of the blue supplement, paragraphs 1 through 12 are the so-called conditions of appropriations. Any comments or questions? Then we proceed to the special appropriations, beginning on page 35 under paragraph 13. And I will read each of these items, and as I said at the beginning of this discussion, if you have questions, please come to a microphone before I reach your item. Item 35, $270,000 for the enhancement of townwide hardware and software. 36, $200,000 for data room upgrades. 37, $25,000 for town furniture upgrades. 38, $125,000 for maintenance of town garage floors. 39, $75,000 for a strategic asset plan to focus on public facilities. And item 40, $100,000 for the development of a conceptual study for the Center Street East parking lot and surrounding areas. Mr. Boland offers an amendment found on the pink sheets to add the words "with neighborhood input" after the word development, the next to the last line of that appropriation. That's seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones for a unanimous advisory committee, and I understand the Board of Selectmen also agree with this amendment. Mr. Boland?
Thank you, Mr. Gadsby. This motion was made.
Who are you?
I am Craig Boland, Precinct 8.
That's what I thought.
This motion was made after a PAC's review of the entire warrant. The parking study is going to have to be reviewed under Article 3.7 of the town's bylaws, the town's procedures for building construction. And when that happens, the town is going to be looking at environmental impact and sustainability as a result of amendments made just a few years ago to the building standards bylaw. The one missing element when you're planning a parking facility is some form of neighborhood input, and that's what we're asking for. The planning department has been proactive. There was already a meeting between a planning staff member and the North Brookline Neighborhood Association on April 15. We're just liking to put town meeting on record as saying that this type of process should continue.
Thank you, Mr. Lescourier. And Mr. Wyszynski, would you come forward to the front row, please? No, go ahead and sit down. I'll call on you when it's time for you to speak. Sorry.
It's David Lescourier. Thank you. Precinct 11, thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is a special appropriation asked town meeting to approve the expenditure of $100,000 for a conceptual study. To be clear about what we are voting on, I quote from the CIP, "The intention to address these needs provides an opportunity to identify and integrate other needs of Coolidge Corner into the planning for an upgraded parking area." And here are examples of the other needs as mentioned in the CIP. Improve pedestrian or bicycle accommodations and expand usable public spaces on Harvard Street between Beacon and Stedman Street. Create a plaza space within the Center Street East parking lot that could accommodate events such as the farmers market. The funding will not finance construction drawings for a 4-level parking structure in the Center Street parcel. I believe the language and intent are clear. This appropriation will enable the town to gather ideas and engage all stakeholders in a broad-based discussion about the future of Coolidge Corner, a vital, historic, urban commercial district. Why is it important? What's changed? We live in a period of growing disruption and accelerating change. Businesses in Coolidge Corner report that activity is down. Customers are no longer entering their establishments as often as used to be the case. I believe whether we are talking about climate change, impact of social media, or the viability of brick and mortar businesses, we cannot complacently choose to continue business as usual. I believe a major concern is the disruptive impact of internet-based retailers. More and more residents of Brookline, and this is not unique to Brookline, are shopping online. The lobby of our building is filled every day with packages of shoes, clothes, books, household supplies, furniture, prescriptions, groceries, you name it. Some of these purchases would have otherwise been bought locally. Bricks and mortar is in decline all over the country. More and more commercial districts are suffering from boarded-up storefronts, and even whole shopping malls have been abandoned. Coolidge Corner is not immune from these trends, and we need to take a serious look at what can be done. For Brookline, the recent controversy about Brookline taxi companies offers some lessons. The Brookline taxi industry is like our canary in the coal mine when it comes to the sustainability of Brookline-based businesses. Last week, the Transportation Board voted to phase down the current taxi license cap from 187 to 120. Of note, a motion to adopt an open license system, no cap on licenses, was voted down 5-1. This was significant because it said that Brookline provides protection to any remaining taxi company. By the same token, if we are going to buck the trend and preserve our vital historic urban business districts, some far-reaching strategic planning leading to a constructive, balanced vision that mitigates the impact of disruption and identifies compelling reasons why shoppers, visitors, diners, and everyone who is looking for a diversity of services should come to Coolidge Corner. The onus is certainly on the businesses themselves, but the town can and should provide a framework and environment that will help sustain our commercial districts. This appropriation is about preserving the qualities of Brookline we all care about. It is very important that all of us in town meeting vote to approve this special appropriation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leschinsky. And Mr. Lowe, would you come forward, please? You can come up to the microphone in front.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? My name is David Leschinsky. I'm a resident, a business owner, and chair of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association. I moved here about 30 years ago. I've been part of the town, got married here, raised a family here. I moved here because Brookline was a wonderful place to be. Coolidge Corner was particularly exciting, and over time I've grown. It's grown even more deeply within me and also with my entire family. So my interests are in keeping Brookline vital and alive as we move forward. Now, David, just before us, talked a little bit about what's happening to retail, and that's true over the entire country, as well as here in Brookline. I've noticed with dismay many businesses that have left, an increase in things like banks, spas, nail salons, cell phone stores, recently yogurt places, but the retail mix has declined to the point where it is no longer as interesting as it was when I first moved to town. One of my daughters, about a year or so ago, said to me that she no longer wants to hang out in Coolidge Corner, and I felt like a knife went through me. And I asked her why, and she said, well, there's nothing for her here. And I realized that this is the voice of the future. This is the people that we're trying to both retain and keep interested in what it is we have to offer. I was worried, frankly, about all of the changes I've seen in small towns over the last many years. I've seen center cities die. I've seen large malls collapse. You know, we've all seen reports about the demise of small retail given the increase in things like Walmart and Amazon. That was not something I wanted to have happen here in Coolidge Corner. So I talked to the town, to Kara Bruton, to other people in the planning department, and realized that there was concern there as well. And so we kicked off a study. And it was a very simple question, and that is, there are some places that are doing well. What are they doing? And is there a pattern, and can we take those elements of things that we find and apply them here to Brookline? So we spent about a year or so researching other communities that all of us agreed were, hey, these are pretty good. These are areas that people are interested in going to. The results of the study are online. It's a vibrancy study. It was very well done. It's about 30 or so pages long. I would urge you to read it if you haven't already. It provides a context for everything that we're doing now. A couple of key things came out of that study. Destination stores no longer make it. It has to be a destination area. People are not interested in going someplace if they have to buy one thing, they'll do it online. Having a diversity of interesting shops and restaurants and things that people can do was an important draw. Having entertainment options, things that enrich the culture, whether it's 1 or 3 or 5 different movie theaters or a performance space or a place for music, that was something that was important. Having a place where people could come and sit and congregate and talk to each other and just watch things go by. So these were all some of the conclusions that came out from the study.
You have 1 minute.
At the end of that, we then said, what is it that Brookline residents want? And many of those same things were echoed in that study. This is a second study, also available on the web, and it's called the Intercept Study. At this point, what we found is that there's a lot of construction going on with Devotion School. There is some planned construction for the Center Street parking lot, and it seems as if there is some interesting commonality between uses. We need parking for teachers, we need parking for visitors and residents. We need open space, we need performance space, we need lots of things that can
30 seconds, sir.
So what this study is offering, the study, the $100,000 number, it's not a study for a parking garage. It's a study to say, how can we best use of this space and provide for the needs for things like open space and performance spaces and things that actually can be enjoyed and utilized by the entire community so that all of us win, residents and merchants and visitors, so that in fact Brookline stays vital and healthy as the changes of retail buffet all of us. Thank you very much.
Now, I have 3 or 4 more speakers on this item, and I would ask each one of them to bear the following in mind. First, there's no discernible opposition to this appropriation. And secondly, you've heard 15 minutes of coherent discussion of what this appropriation is all about, and please try not to be redundant. Mr. Lowe.
Thank you very much. I have nothing. Oh,
Who are you, sir?
David Lowe. Thank you, Tommy. David Lowe from Precinct 11. I have nothing nearly as profound or clever as the Davids before me, so I'll be very brief. When I look at the parking lot and so many other spaces in Brookline, I see sunshine falling on them. I see the energy capacity for these spaces. And so I just wanted to seed the idea as we think about developing a space that we think about the top of that space and think solar. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mr. Christ.
Hi, my name is Alan Christ, and I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 4. I just wanted to make a brief comment about Article 8, Special Appropriation Item 40. Coolidge Corner is Brookline's downtown, and it currently lacks a large public outdoor gathering space in the manner of Copley, Harvard, or Davis Squares, one which is designed to host our farmers market, festivals, or other outdoor public gatherings. Right now, all we have are the sidewalks, which are very limited in their potential uses, and a very large parking lot, which is frankly not the best use of space in such a central location. While many constituencies would need to weigh in on any changes to the Center Street lot to ensure that the voices of pedestrians, cyclists, drivers, local business owners, and other abutters are all heard, the potential positive impact of creating a large public space in Coolidge Corner far outweighs the perceived negative impact of consolidating the existing parking in a smaller footprint. The consolidated parking could be further minimized if it is below grade or at least lined with senior housing, offices, or retail on the street-facing facades, so it's not visible. For this reason, the proposed study is a worthy and desperately needed undertaking which could potentially give public open space back to all our residents and bring life to what is currently a neglected and underutilized space in a very central location. Townwide input is critical to this study with the goal of ensuring that the space is one which supports all of our residents.
Thank you. Mr. Vitolo.
Mr. Moderator, I'm Tommy Vitolo, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. I have a question. The longer description of item 40, which being used in 8-54, includes 5 bullets about what the consultant will be looking at, and I wonder if those are effectively restrictions. So, for example, would the consultant be permitted to look at a 4-decked parking structure or to improve pedestrian and/or bicycle accommodations along Beacon between Harvard and Center, or is the study strictly limited to the 5 bullet points listed?
I would think that the study would not be so limited, but is there anyone with more knowledge about the subject? I'm advised by the town administrator that the study will not be so limited.
Thank you.
Ms. Patel?
Thank you. Sherry Mattel, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. I just want to let you know, speaking for the League of Women Voters of Brookline, that we're very pleased to see this item, special appropriations. A long time ago, at least 15 years ago, we undertook a study of parking in the Coolidge Corner area, among others. And I just wanted to read you part of our support position. We believe that there should be a feasibility study of the structure at the Center Street East parking lot, subject to consideration of the transportation needs of the overall Coolidge Corner community. So that would take care of the community input, which we approve of course. This structure should include space for parking, mixed use, which could include retail, office, housing, etc., as well as civic amenities such as green space, benches, outdoor performances, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll vote on Mr. Boland's amendment. but there's no need to vote on the item itself since there's been no opposition expressed. On Mr. Boland's amendment to add with neighborhood input to the words in the next to the last line of item 40, those in favor please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 41, $75,000 for public safety computer-aided dispatch system. $300,000, item 42, $300,000 for the rehabilitation of fire department apparatus. 43, $31,000 for traffic calming studies and improvements. 44, $105,000 for bicycle access improvements. 45, $1,590,000 for the rehabilitation of streets. 46, $297,000 for the rehabilitation of sidewalks. 47, $220,000 for the conversion of town-owned streetlights to LEDs. 48, $650,000 for renovations to the Municipal Service Center. 49, $890,000 for the renovation of Brookline Avenue Playground. 50, $40,000 for the design of the renovation of the Corey Hill Playground. 51, $60,000 for the design of the renovation of Emerson Garden Playground. 52, $250,000 for the restoration of the Brookline Reservoir Gatehouse roof. 53, $230,000 for the rehabilitation of tennis courts and basketball courts. 54, $300,000 for the renovation of playground equipment, fields, and fencing. 55, $90,000 for the rehabilitation of town and school grounds. 56, $225,000 for the removal and replacement of trees. 57, $50,000 for the rehabilitation of roadways within the Walnut Hill Cemetery. 58, $675,000 for pool repointing and locker room renovations at the Carane Aquatics Center. 59, $70,000 for school furniture upgrades. 60, $80,000 for mobile carts in the Brookline Public Schools. Mr. Davis.
Jonathan Davis, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, can somebody explain why this $80,000 cannot be funded out of the school department budget?
Mr. Rowe.
Peter Rowe, Deputy Superintendent of Schools. This is the second year of an appropriation, which is running coterminous with the increased appropriation for technology in the school department's operating budget. So it's the last $80,000 for its cards for the mobile technology that will be moving in and out of classrooms. Most of our technology funding will now be in the operating budget.
The answer is this is a capital item, not an operating item, and the school budget is an operating budget, Mr. Davis. 61, $70,000 for ADA renovations to town and school buildings. 62, $275,000 for improvements to elevators in town and school facilities. 63, $165,000 for energy conservation projects in town and school buildings. 64, $185,000 for upgrades to energy management systems in town and school facilities. 65, $195,000 for improvements to life safety systems and building security in town and school facilities. 66, $2,250,000 for the expansion of classroom capacity in various schools. Mr. Friedman?
Harry Friedman, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, item 66 is found in greater detail
on page 8-66.
65, actually.
It starts on 65, and the numbers appear to be on 66, the
Thank
next
you.
page. I have two questions and then a possible comment. My first question is, it's a little unclear whether this is really for $2,250,000 in fiscal year 16, and I was wondering if someone might be able to clarify that.
It's a multi-year appropriation, Mr. Friedman.
So only a portion of that
Only
would be...
$992,000, I think, is to be expended in the current, in fiscal 16.
Thank you. My second question is that what seems to be outlined on page 8-66 is for some custodial services and in large part for temporary rental of space in various town synagogues. On page 8-47, there's a definition of CIP project, and the definition says a capital improvement project is, 1, any project that improves or adds to the town's infrastructure, I'm adding the 2, has a substantial useful life, and 3, costs $25,000 or more. This definitely costs $25,000 or more. However, I fail to see how rental expenditures, not in conjunction with construction of a new school, qualify as projects that add to the town's infrastructure or have a substantial life. So my question is somewhat like Mr. Davis's. Are these not operating expenses? Why are they on the capital side of the budget?
Mr. Rowe?
Peter Rowe, Deputy Superintendent. The answer is yes. These, the lion's share of this expenditure next year will be for the lease for a preschool space of 2 temples, primarily Temple Emeth and Obar Shalom. Additionally, we'll be paying rent or a lease cost for an additional space to support students from the Pierce School, Harvard Street location. And additionally, we'll be using money for this for the installation of modulars on a lease purchase agreement for the Baker School. If you break out the cost, most of this is for the square foot rental cost, but we do have a blanket lease, if you will, that incorporates some of the energy and some of the cleaning costs using the staff that are already contracted at those facilities. We just thought it was a more efficient way to do it, so that the package itself, the entire cost, is being paid out of the capital budget.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you have another question, Mr. Friedman?
I have a comment, Mr. Moderator.
Sure. Go ahead.
My comment is I can understand how the sale and leaseback would be considered a capital cost. I simply do not understand how the rental of beep space or preschool space at Temple Emeth and at Temple Ohabe Shalom is anything other than an operating expense, both under common definitions of capital versus operating expenses and under the definition that I cited before in our CIP definition. I wake up every morning and I look in the mirror and I see a face that looks strikingly like Hugh Jackman. This is called self-delusion, because I have never, do not, nor probably ever will, look like the tall, dark, and handsome Australian. I would posit that putting this money on the capital side of the budget is also an act of self-delusion, and I would posit that the CIP formula, which is outlined on page 8-49, which says that we devote 6% of net revenues to capital, along with 7.5% of free cash to capital, is self-delusion if we are going to put operating items on the capital budget. I think this is an assault on the integrity of the budgeting process, and B, it means that various capital items that we might have had, such as more efficient snow gatherers, we're not going to get because we have operating items on the capital side of the budget. I realize these are important expenses, and I'm not going to throw the budget out of whack this year or ask that anyone does it. But these are multi-year items, and I would ask that over the next year, the school department either find a way to move these rental expenses to the operating side of their budget, or the advisory committee and the selectmen amend the formula as to how much we spend on capital. Because I think it's self-delusion to claim that we're spending a certain amount when in fact we're really not. And I would hope that over the next year, this item gets moved to the proper side of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Yes, ma'am. You had a question? Item 67, $980,000 for the renovation of Pierce Playground. This is a bonding vote, and I'll ask those in favor of this appropriation to raise your hands. Those opposed, raise your hands. Motion carries unanimously. Item 68, another bonding vote, $3 million for wastewater system improvements. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, unanimous. Item 69, $1 million for golf course improvements. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Carol Hillman, a town meeting member from Precinct 1. I would commend the department for wanting to renovate further the golf course, which in many ways is in deplorable condition. And I would further hope and ask the question as to whether there is a long-range plan for additional renovations of other holes besides the 9th fairway. There's the 1st fairway. There are many others that need a lot of work. And I'd like to know if there's a long-range plan for this so that the job can be done efficiently and expeditiously, and so that we can attract more golfers who now are going to Newton, which is not as nice a golf course. Thank you.
Ms. Galantine or Mr. Clark? Oh, Ms. Paradis.
Thank you. Lisa Paradis, Recreation Director. Yes, we actually are working off a master plan from 1999, which actually is a very good master plan. We have many other things planned at the golf course, but we really don't have the money to do all of those things at the golf course. So we've chosen our priorities in order of the things that we can afford and the things that will bring us the most revenue. And the 9th fairway, as you know, is one of those issues. So we are working off a master plan. I'd be more than happy to share that with anybody who would like that.
Yes, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. The question I have is whether the golf course is self-sustaining, and if not, how close is it to being self-sustaining?
It is indeed self-sustaining. It has been for many years, 100%.
Thank you. On the appropriation, item 69, those in favor, you can stand down, Ms. Paradis. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries. Those opposed, motion carries 218 to 2. Item 70, $1,550,000 for building envelope fenestration repairs to town and school buildings. Those in favor, please raise your hands. This is another bonding vote. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Item 71, $1,200,000 for roof repairs and replacements in town and school facilities. Bonding vote, those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Item 72, $1 million for extraordinary repairs to the old Lincoln School. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Item 73, $118,400,000 for the renovation of and construction of additions to the Edward Devotion School. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Those opposed, motion carries by a vote of 222 to 1. Paragraph 14 deals with the allocation of free cash. Are there any questions or comments? If not, we will proceed to the budget table. The revenues are estimated revenues, and they're set forth at the top of the first page of the budget table. Mr. Friedman?
I'm Harry Friedman, Precinct 12. On the revenue side, on page 16 of the blue supplement, and I have to say, whoever wrote this blue supplement did, I thought, an outstanding job. There are 2 dot points on the Red Cab site and the Brookline Place, and in both of them, the property tax spikes in year 2 and then goes down. Could somebody please explain why it goes down?
Mr. Wyszynski? I think we have mostly Mr. Lynn Jones to thank for the this discussion and the blue supplement.
Those are increments. So, so in the first year, there's a small increment. The second year, there's a larger increment, and then the third year, it's a smaller increment, but it's cumulative. So you're adding to each year.
Oh, so for instance, in year 4, it's higher for Red Cab than 275, than 275?
It's the first year plus the second year.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now we proceed to the departmental expenditures. And ladies and gentlemen, this is your opportunity to ask questions of department heads as we reach their budgets. The questions may be fiscal, that is budget related, or otherwise. And you might as well sit down, Ms. Snyder. It's a long ways to the recreation budget. But thank you for coming up front. So as I read a budget item, and if you wish to ask questions of the department head, please come to a microphone. Selectmen, 662, 312. Human Resources, 533,746. Information Technology, 1,805,725.
Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, thank you. Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9, co-chair of PACS with Frank Farlow and trying to figure out the microphone.
Oh, why don't you, I think maybe if you don't.
It fell out is the problem. I've done what I do at home.
Why don't you come to another microphone?
I've got
it. Got it.
Thank you for your help. I'd just like to commend Mr. Stokes and Mr. Bavanti for adding the agendas to the electronic notices of meetings, so you don't have to open up the website. That's it.
Thank you. Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, 175,827. Mr. Rosenthal again.
Yes, thank you. I have 2 questions, if you would. First is on the committee that created this commission, which I'm quite proud of, and Nancy Daly did a great job chairing. We agreed to defer some bylaws that need to be looked at, and I'm wondering if the selectmen have thought about maybe having town council look at those for a future town meeting.
Ms. Daly?
I've got to admit, we've all been busy lately, but we have had some casual discussion about it, and we'll move it along. Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask another one, Mr.
Sure.
I'm wondering if Dr. Gelano could give us a brief report on the activities of the commission, because it's mostly been done since the annual report was written.
Mr. Gelano?
Lloyd Gelano from the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Office. Would like to say that the commission actually has been functioning since January of this year. We've been meeting fairly regularly. There was some time that we had to work out, sort of the growing pains of any commission, establishing executive committees, et cetera. At this current state, we are actually have several different subcommittees are actively engaging in some activities. One of them is the hiring process, where we're looking at the affirmative action and EEO policies of the town and making recommendations. We also have the complaint process committee, which is actually functioning and actually looking at some of the processes that my office uses, as well as what they will be using in looking at discriminatory behavior in the town. Tonight, actually, the meeting should be concluding right now. We have what we call the Outreach Committee, which will be doing a lot of activities, such as looking at cultural issues, celebrations, and actually is part of the more inclusive and celebratory part of the work that we do. We've still got a lot of one way to go in terms of putting processes in place as to run the commission, but I'm pretty sure that we're getting there, and we've done a lot of work since we started in January.
Thank you. Finance Department, $2,911,236.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator. Hi.
Yes.
I'm Jen Goldsmith, Precinct 11. I had a question on human resources, and you...
I can't hear you.
Oh,
Closer
sorry.
to the mic,
Can you
please.
hear me now?
Yes.
Jen Goldsmith, Precinct 11. I actually had a question on human resources, and we went by it fast. It's a quick one, but it's a little hard to get out of the aisle to get
What's
to
your
the microphone.
question, and to whom is it addressed?
I guess it's to Ms. Debo. Is that the head of human resources? Is that, you tell me to whom it's addressed. It's not a big budget question, but I have to say I have a couple kids who referee for the town. Every 12 weeks, their applications become inactive. They have to do a 30-page application that apparently isn't kept on hand. And it's time-consuming. It's got to take staff time. It's inefficient. I talked to the rec department. They said they can't make any headway in changing this. And it just seems like a really inefficient, expensive, paper-driven way to have kids try to start to work for the town. So I guess that's a question for human resources, is if it's built into the budget, that administrative cost over and over again, is there a way to streamline expenses and make this easier for kids to get jobs in the town?
Mr. Bowe?
Hi, my name is Sandra DeBoe. I'm the HR director. I believe what you're talking about is when an employee goes off the payroll and then they are reapplying for a new position. In those instances, they're applying for another position or a new job. If you're talking about regular summer camp, then there's another credentialing process that we have to go through. One of the most important reasons why we do this is that recreation employees deal with children. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the check for the Department of Social Services and the Corey backgrounds.
Thank you. Finance Department, $2,911,000. Will you come to a microphone, ma'am? Ms. DeBoe, you might as well stay up
So
here.
the question is, I'm talking about 14 and 15-year-olds who are referees. They're not applying for a new job. They referee spring, they referee fall. They have a 30-page application from your office. It seems unlikely that they need to complete all 30 pages again, and that some administrative person is going through that, entering it to a computer, taking time to do that. It just seems really inefficient. And I understand if you need to redo a query check, but many bigger organizations manage not to have paper applications 30 pages long. I can't imagine something more dissuading to getting your first job or more inefficient.
Ms. DeBoe?
So I would have to look at that. 30 pages seems like a lot to me. But again, it's part of the process of getting someone on and off the payroll. But we'll look at it and we'll see, what kind of streamlining. This is something that we look at on a regular basis. But without knowing the specific,
It's
we'll
really
continue to
30
look at
pages,
it.
And it's really referees who work, spring and fall. So by definition, there are more than 12 weeks between their employment. And they're 14 and 15 years old. So I appreciate your looking into it. and
Okay,
I'm
your
happy to
comment's
do that.
well taken, Ms. Goldsmith, and she'll look into it. Legal services, $833,934. Advisory committee, $24,900. Town clerk, $611,324. Planning and community development, $810,693. Police, $16,536,836. Mr. Friedman.
Harry Friedman, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, there's been some press recently about police departments that have been the subject of something called ransomware, where people from overseas send a virus to the police department. All the records are disabled. The police departments are then forced to pay relatively small amounts, several $100s, usually in the form of bitcoins, so that it's impossible to find out who's actually doing this. And then they get their records back. And I was wondering, A, if Brookline had been subject to such attacks, and B, what we might be doing regarding backups or training personnel so that we're not subject to such attacks in the future.
Mr. Chief O'Leary.
Good evening, Dan O'Leary, the Chief of Police. The answer to your first question is fortunately no. We have not been subject to any attacks, but we're not unaware that it's a very good possibility that we could be. In order to answer your second one, I did ask if Kevin Stokes would, if that's okay with the moderator, answer our IT
Sure.
director, who can answer it a little bit better, I think.
Mr. Stokes.
Good evening, Kevin Stokes, Chief Information Officer for the town and the schools. Yes, from an IT perspective, one of the luxuries we have of having a combined infrastructure, town, school, public safety, and libraries, that we can build our infrastructure around a common set of products, standards, and processes. That allows us to sort of, as we say, guard the periphery, to the extent that best practices would dictate. In addition, we also regularly bring in consultants to sort of evaluate our work and evaluate that we're actually adhering to a lot of the common challenges that are out there. With that said, if you follow the news quite a bit, there is no shortage of breaches. In fact, the IRS had a significant one this afternoon that was announced about 5 o'clock. And from our perspective, we're mindful of the fact of who we are, and the world is a very large, threatening place in terms of computer systems. We have to be good every day. It all starts with security awareness with our end users, and actually working with the chief and public safety folks, we were able to leverage a grant with the Metro Boston Homeland Security for a very enhanced end user awareness campaign that will be kicking off over the summer.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, thank you, Marty Rosenthal, still Precinct 9. I want to ask the chief a question, which I know I've talked to him about before, but I want to preface it by saying that, like many of us, I feel we have as good a police department as there is in the state, and a chief who's very concerned with accountability, and I'm very proud of our police department. I don't usually get applause at these microphones, so I know it's not for me. The question is, Chief, you and I have talked about body cameras and cruiser cameras, and I know there are issues about privacy and state law and maybe collective bargaining and so forth, and I know you've spoken generally about openness to them, and I wonder if you can give us a little idea what's happening now in terms of your thinking and whether there's anything going on at the state level to make it easier.
Well, I think at the outset, let me say that I am in favor of the body cameras. I think the positives very much outweigh the negatives. I've talked to people and I've attended conferences with people from all over the country, and every bit of the feedback that we're getting is that it's a positive experience. And I think the best way to put it is it just seems like everybody, the police and the citizens they interact with, all act a little bit better towards each other when they know there's a camera recording. Now, having said that, there's a lot of work that has to be done up front before you can implement a system like that. We worked on it somewhat when we did the camera, the SIMS camera system that's on the intersections throughout town, when we have to deal with issues such as privacy and data retention and who's going to have access to the materials. All that stuff should be worked out before we could deploy them here in Brookline. We're talking about operating cameras in people's houses or operating cameras with people that could have their worst day of their lives, and that's something that I think all has to get worked out ahead of time before we put them on an officer's chest. As far as the state level, they have been talked about at the state. I think the federal government is what everybody reads about the president who has set aside, I think, $50 million for the camera project. The good part about that is that will pay for training and the cameras themselves. The bad part about it doesn't pay for data storage. A couple of weeks ago, we did have a company come in to talk to us about data storage, one of the leading companies in the country, that deploy the most cameras in the country. And they basically said that per officer, you figure $100 a month for data retention. That will also buy you the cameras, help you with training, and in the 2.5 year of a 5-year plan, it will be, they'll upgrade the cameras at that point for no cost. However, Brookline has 136 police officers, so say we deploy to 125, and we keep data for 90 days. That's $150,000 a year just to store the data at today's cost, which is a lot. And as I talk about the length of storage, I know that's subject to debate, but you have to remember our citizen complaint policy requires us or allows people to file complaints against the police up to 6 months after the event takes place. And these cameras are supposed to help us resolve those complaints to the best of our ability. So there's a lot that has to be worked on. The end, I think they're going to make everybody a little bit better, and I think that it will improve the policing profession.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Roseman?
Linda Roseman, Precinct 14. I was hoping that the chief could talk a little bit about the crisis intervention training program that the police department is currently undergoing. I think that the police department should be commended for that. I know that last year one of my colleagues asked at town meeting a question about how police officers deal with people with mental illness, which is a problem that we see all over the country, and we certainly, I know you deal with that in our town as well. And I just was hoping that you could share a little bit about that training, because I think the department should be commended for taking that on.
Yeah, Chief O'Leary?
Thank you. Yeah, last town meeting, I think it was town meeting member Karen Wentz asked me a question about it. And when I went back to the police station the next day to talk to some people who are very much involved with handling the mentally ill and treating people with mental illness respectfully, they proposed to me a program that they had been working on, and there was 2 sergeants, Sergeant Jen Pastor and Sergeant Chris Mullen, Officer Jim Ridden, and Captain, now Deputy Michael Grotman. They all had been working on a program to train up to 25% of our department right now is considered the state-of-the-art, most extensive training in critical incident, handling people with mental illness and dealing with critical incidents. We did that initially with 10 officers that volunteered that had been trained up until probably the winter of this year. We then sought and obtained a grant for about $14,000 that expires at the end of June for more training, and then we got a second grant from the state for next fiscal year. That will bring us to just over 25% of our force that have been trained. We've graduated 4 more 2 weeks ago, and 4 more are graduating this Thursday. It's a 40-hour training, and that's basically the bottom line will be when we respond to a call that we know is a person struggling with mental illness, we will assign one of the officers, because we'll spread them out over the hours of work, to be the case, basically the case officer to follow through that from the scene to down the hospital to talk to the doctors, and then to the follow-up that gets done. As a background to that, we've also put together a group of a lot of mental health professionals, schools, people throughout town, Boston, surrounding areas. Somerville, Cambridge have been very helpful. Taunton's been very helpful, and the NAMI group. And they form a committee that meets on a quarterly basis in town here, just to make sure that the program is moving as it should. I think, again, that is going to be a great thing. I think one of the things that we see happening all over the country is that a lot of people that the police interact with that end up badly are people that are suffering from mental illness. And I think we owe it to everybody to try to get ahead of the curve. This training will allow us to do that, and it'll put us on a track to handle people that have to be handled a little bit differently, and I think in a better manner. And we're just scratching the surface, but we do have a lot of dedicated people in the department and in this town that want to see us do a better job.
Thank you, Ms. Spiegel.
Diana Spiegel, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. I echo Linda Roseman and Marty Rosenthal's appreciation for the work your department is doing. A very brief question. I'm just curious to know what goes into I see that there's an 8.1% increase in the budget for the police department, and I just wondered what's going into that. It seems a bit higher than other departments.
Chief?
I think some of that increase, wasn't that you can correct me if I'm wrong, but got given back once the, oh, okay. I'll take that back. When we did the collective bargaining this time around, we did the 5% raise for officers 20 years or more, and also the officers that were non-Quinn eligible now have an educational incentive plan.
Thank you.
That's the
Thank you. Fire budget, $12,994,548. Building, $7,283,220. Public Works, $14,103,923. Mr. Goldstein.
Hi, Ken Goldstein, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. Question for Mr. Ditto, if he's here. Just like an update on the Fisher Avenue reconstruction. When can we see work begin, and more importantly, when can it end?
Mr. Ditto.
I'm Peter Ditto, Director of Engineering and Transportation. To answer your question, we opened bids on that project 2 weeks ago. We have a low bidder within budget. We'll award and execute probably a week from this coming Tuesday, and shovel on the ground probably 10 days after that. Duration should be done before school starts in September.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Jonathan Lewis, Precinct 7. I had a question regarding, I noticed there were some administration cost cuts in the budget line. I wanted to ask what part of the DPW budget is committed to communication to those residents who live on major thoroughfares when there is emergent work that's happening during the overnight hours, either snow and ice removal or utility work. Right now, this work just seems to happen, when contractors are available and there's no notice.
Mr. Papasturgeon.
Andrew Papasturgeon, Commissioner of Public Works. If your question is relative to notification of residents for nighttime activities, generally snow and ice, there is no notice. we take advantage of whatever time we can get on snow and ice removal, and that's generally, immediately after a storm, and probably, well, this winter was an anomaly, but probably a good week after the storm. Generally, if it's a contractor operation and that work is scheduled, we do put out public notifications, including hand-delivered letters to each of the abutters that are along that stretch of the street. If it's a utility project, either through NSTAR, Eversource, or National Grid, their public relations folks are supposed to do all that communication as well.
Thank you. Mr. Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Clint Richmond, Precinct 6, here in my home precinct. I had sort of a macro question about the Public Works Department. I'm a little concerned that the budget has gone down 3 years in a row and is actually now below the fiscal year 13. Is that sort of a directive to cut back on public works spending, or are we achieving efficiencies? The snow and ice budget's really low. There's numbered and highways down too.
Generally, fluctuations in the public works budget between divisions are due to fluctuations in capital equipment purchases. For instance, in a given year, you may see the Parks Division go up a certain percentage and the Highway Division go down a certain percentage, and that's due to whatever our equipment schedule is. Equipment is allocated to each division based on what the needs are and what the equipment replacement schedule is. Generally, the fluctuations are due to capital equipment replacement. However, if you look in that overall trends and decreases to the budget, I would generally say that through efficiencies in our operation, we've been able to decrease our budget. For instance, this past year, we awarded a contract for solid waste disposal, and we were able to save about $200,000 annually in our disposal costs. We are currently rebidding the contract for recycling, collection, and processing, and we're hoping to see some savings there as well.
Ms. Carroll?
Carol, Precinct 10. My question is about park maintenance, and it has to do with the park on the corner of John and Green Street, which is in pretty bad condition, and I'm wondering what the timeline is on upgrading and maintaining that parklet.
Ms. Galantine? Ms. Paradis, sorry.
Erin Galantine, Director of Parks and Open Space. We had a small working group that worked with some of the abutters and residents in Coolidge Corner neighborhood and came up with a nice small scale improvement to that park that we're going to look to implement with in-house resources. And so I would look to spring of 2016 for us to be able to start to implement that.
Thank you. Mr. Farlow?
Frank Farlow, Precinct 4. Could we get an update on the timeline for the Emerald Necklace project?
Ms. Galantine?
Phase 1 of the Emerald Necklace restoration project is underway, and they are about to embark into the design process for Phase 2, which will take a couple years, and then they will put that portion of the project out to bid, and we estimate that that would probably take 2 to 3 years to complete.
Thank you. Ms. Axelrod, is it?
Ingrid Cooper, Precinct 4.
I'm sorry, Ms. Cooper.
I'm not sure who this exactly is directed to, perhaps Mr. Papasturgis, but we're trying to find out on our block what to do about lines that are down that cannot be identified as being phone or cable or whatever, and apparently don't carry live service, but are not, we cannot get tenants, residents and tenants in the area can't get attention to the lines to remove them. And they're wrapped around trees, and wondering who we would exactly contact for that.
Mr. Papasturgeon?
Especially we don't know what the service is or was.
If you give my office a call and give us a location, we will certainly investigate just what they are, and we will identify who owns them and get the proper utility out there to take care of them.
29 Brook Street.
29 Brook?
Brook, right. The tree right in front of the house.
Library, $3,888,386. Health and Human Services, $1,151,234. Veteran Services, $329,662. Council on Aging, $875,211. Mr. Carroll.
Frank Carroll, Precinct 10. I have a question about the Council on Aging budget. I suspect there's an item, a small item in the budget that might be of particular interest to town meeting members, a new item, and I would appreciate an explanation.
Ms. Dobek.
Ruth Ann Dobek, Director of the Brookline Council on Aging Senior Center. Yes, in the FY16 budget, there is an increase of $10,000 for a new program for the town for low-income renters who will be able to work in various town departments and receive $1,000. This is a similar project to our tax work-off program, which currently has 30 slots. And when we were first advocating for the tax work-off program, Estelle Katz, a former selectwoman and advisory committee, strongly urged us to look to renters for additional or similar kind of support that we were providing property tax owners. And this became even more important as we saw from the Brookline Community Foundation study that 2/3 of our elders are paying over 30% of their income, up to 50% for rental. And this is a small step in providing some relief. And we were able to start with a pilot program this year for 5 slots, and in FY16 we'll be able to expand it to 10 slots for renters.
Thank you. Recreation, $1,018,816. Personnel Services Reserve, $715,000. Collective Bargaining Town, $1,850,000. Schools, $96,290,380. Dr. Lupini. I make 2 exceptions to my blanket policy on honorariums, and that is they're both the superintendent and former superintendent of schools. I've called Dr. Sperber for 45 years, and I can't stop. Dr. Lupini, the same.
Good evening, Bill Lupini, Superintendent of Schools. I want to thank, first of all, Mr. Wyszynski and Mr. Lynn Jones for their terrific descriptions of the FY16 budget, and in particular the school department budget. Budgets are the methods by which leaders communicate priorities and implement the mission, vision, and goals of an organization. For the past many years, meeting our goals has run up against another price of success, and that is our enrollment growth. Our enrollment population has grown by 38%. Our elementary population has grown by 38% since FY06, and our overall student numbers have increased by 25% during that same time period. Against these increases, growth of revenues in real dollars has been constrained by the fixed nature of Proposition 2.5. Because of the revenue reductions and system growth and our decision to invest foremost in classroom teachers as enrollments grew, we have fallen short of meeting long-term goals in several areas. However, our FY16 budget is built largely on revenues available through the successful override vote on May 5th. We appreciate the support that Brookline voters have provided through this override ballot question, as well as the debt exclusion approved for the Devotion School renovation and addition project. This override budget puts critical resources toward our commitment to containing class sizes and toward realizing an equitable technology plan throughout our schools, and it also provides all students with supports for meaningful learning, whatever their level of challenge may be. Our school system is built on a number of important principles that serve our students and families and that inform key budgeting and investment for continuous improvement in our practice. In the interest of time, I'll only highlight a few of them. You can read the others in our FY16 budget message. First, we invest in great classroom teachers, and we believe in limiting class size. We've focused our dollars on hiring classroom teachers for additional sections and maintaining reasonable class sizes of up to 22 students at the K-3 level and up to 25 students in grades 4 through 8. We believe that serving Brookline students in Brookline schools is best for our students, for families, and our community. We have steadily invested in special education, in building programs, improving team facilitation, along with regular education services like literacy instruction, child study teams, and classroom supports from paraprofessionals in grades K and 1. In this way, we better serve our students and their families in Brookline in a cost-effective manner. The pre-K-8 model is best for Brookline. The pre-K-8 model facilitates strong connections between schools and families, in addition to allowing for the creation of strong long-term relationships between teachers and students. We're committed to this model, as well as to eventually bringing our pre-K classes back to our elementary schools. We believe that teachers matter. We believe that providing opportunities for quality professional learning, support for the families of our teachers, and competitive salaries, benefits, and working conditions are critical elements in guaranteeing that outstanding educators come to and stay in Brookline. We believe that quality early education anchors success in schools. We remain steadfast supporters of Brookline's outstanding early education program, BEEP. Improvement includes adding classes to meet student and family needs when appropriate, enhancing partnerships with other providers, and ensuring quality classroom space, whether rented or in our schools. We believe that technology is essential to high-quality educational environments. Equitable access throughout all of our schools to contemporary tools of teaching and learning for all teachers and all students is no longer discretionary. And finally, we believe that the METCO program is part of the fabric of Brookline and its schools. Brookline has been a member of METCO for over 40 years. METCO brings an important element of diversity to our schools and community. It is clear that Boston students benefit from a Brookline education, but it's also clear that our students derive numerous advantages from this voluntary desegregation program as well. Specifically, our budget proposal assumes an incoming kindergarten class of 650 students, although as we've seen evidence in 2 of the past 3 years that our numbers may actually exceed these projections. While budget allocations and prioritization of spending have enabled us to maintain favorable class sizes during our enrollment surge, we've not been able to bring the same level of urgency to classroom supports, including guidance, nurses, materials and supplies, building maintenance, administration, and other areas of the program. And this year we can. This plan attempts to bring significant resources to those neglected areas while still recognizing that we will need to continue to make difficult choices and seek more efficient ways of doing business to meet the goals described in our strategic plan. Again, my thanks to Brookline voters for their approval of the $7.7 million override question and the devotion school debt exclusion. We know that there are many challenges ahead, including the continued acceleration of our elementary growth, numbers yet to come from Hancock Village, and the looming upsurge in our high school population, factors that will continue to challenge all of us to find new and innovative ways to work together in ensuring that our schools meet the needs of all students. We are committed to utilizing these funds to provide an outstanding public education for all Brookline students, and moreover, we have dedicated ourselves to ensuring a high degree of innovation, accountability, and transparency to this community in the implementation and documentation of our efforts. Thanks very much.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have been through town and school budgets totaling $165 million, and now to a number of non-departmental expenditures. First, employee benefits, $53,790,574, and these are broken down on the top of the next page of your budget tables. Reserve fund, item 24, reserve fund, $2,200,198. Affordable housing, $163,078. Liability and catastrophe fund, $78,969. General insurance, $382,645. Audit professional services, $130,000. Contingency fund, $15,000. Out-of-state travel, $3,000. Printing of warrants and reports, $35,000.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes?
I'm Michael A. Burstein, Precinct 12. I'm curious about the 40% jump in the budget on this line item from last year. Are we planning to double the size of town meeting? Is it a
You're talking about item 32, Mr. Burstein?
Yes, the printing of the, and presumably distribution of the warrant and reports.
Does the town clerk want to deal with that question? The town clerk does not want to deal with that question. Okay. The principal reason for the increase, Mr. Burstein, is the cost of implementing electronic voting, which is mainly personnel costs.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Borrowing, $9,478,591. So total non-departmental expenditures of $66,289,333. Total general appropriations, $231,696,264. And we have already been through the special appropriations, tax financed, revenue financed special appropriations total $10,113,000. So total appropriated expenditures are $241,809,246. There are non-appropriated expenditures over which we have no control, totaling $8,188,000, for a total budget of $249,997,582. We are at the end of the budget and the budget discussion. All those in favor of the budget as set forth by the advisory committee on the blue sheets, please raise your hands. Thank you. Those opposed? This motion carries unanimously. Those opposed, please. I see two hands. 218 to 2. Article 9. The motion is for no action under Article 9. It's a position taken by the petitioner, Mr. Fry, who moves no action. It's seconded by Mr. Wyszynski. And I would like those in favor of no action to please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Article 10. The main motion under Article 10 is found on page 10-12 with one change. In section 4.8.3, the second line should begin A, comma, B, comma, C, comma, strike and comma, D, and F. So you're striking the word and before D and adding and F after D. So it will read A, B, C, D, and F. That motion is made by Mr. Swartz, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. Ms. Connors offers an amendment. And Ms. Connor's amendment would make the following changes. It would make no change in the current law under section 4.85A at the top of page 10-13. So Ms. Connors would maintain the present bylaw as it is, which reads, seasonal employees who work less than 6 months in any 12-month cycle. And she would further delete the 2 definitions that are added in the main motion on page 10-14. Is there a second to that motion? Motion is seconded. Mr. Swartz for the advisory committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chuck Swartz, speaking for the advisory committee. The advisory committee voted 19 in favor, 0 opposed to the version of Article 10, which appears on page 10-12 of the combined reports. In spite of what you might have read in the tab, this version maintains the Brookline minimum wage of $1 more than the minimum wage in section 4.8.3. Also in this section, the words, as the moderator has just mentioned, and F was applied to keep this in keeping with the Board of Selectmen's version. The Recreation Department, bringing this article, proposes to add a group of junior positions to the exceptions in section 4.8.3. These positions include, but are not limited to, junior counselors, junior swim coaches, junior lifeguards, etc., and would be similar to junior library pages. By changing some of the language in section 4.8.5A, the Recreation Department hopes to accomplish the following. The change to 6 consecutive months in a fiscal year will ease the burden of having to track employees who may work sporadically through the year, tracking them manually, to a more efficient automated process. It would allow for raises to be given based on merit, a $1 raise as opposed to a more than $3 or 30% raise. Adding "or temporary" in this section better describes employees hired to do certain work in specific seasons. There is an estimated savings of $28,000 per year, money that could be transferred back to the general fund or to be used to maintain fees at current levels. There were concerns raised in our many meetings. Do employees in this category need to earn a decent wage? This mostly affects people in junior positions, and only in the Recreation Department. They would still be eligible to receive merit raises. The idea of merit raises made this more supportable to those who thought the article would be an emotional, hard sell. Are there any unintended consequences? We were told that there are no non-school employees affected by this. We do not know if any school employees would fall into this category. Most temporary employees brought in, like plumbers, electricians, etc., not members of the Recreation Department, are often hired at living wage or higher. It was pointed out that in some other communities with living wage laws, seasonal employees and those under 21 are exempted. This would put Brookline more in line with other communities such as Boston, Cambridge, and Washington, D.C. Recreational Department's employees hired with experience are often hired at living wage. Again, after much discussion and by a vote of 19-0-0, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on Article 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Connors. On your amendment, or whatever else is relevant.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Patricia Connors from Precinct 3. Presently, American cities such as Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles have voted to raise their minimum wage to $15 per hour in the next few years. Former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich is leading a national campaign to increase the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour. He argues that raising the minimum wage to $15 will put money in the pockets of millions of low-wage workers who will spend it, thereby giving working families and the overall economy a boost and creating jobs. Mr. Reich points out that at a time when 95% of all economic gains are going to the top 1%, raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour isn't just smart economics and good politics, it's also the morally right thing to do. In his recent book, Capital in the 21st Century, the French economist Thomas Piketty examines the distribution of wealth and the historical evolution of income inequality. He notes that the U.S. minimum wage reached its maximum level of purchasing power nearly half a century ago, in 1969, and that inequalities at the bottom of the U.S. wage distribution have closely followed the evolution of the minimum wage. The gap between the bottom 10% of the wage distribution and the overall average wage widened significantly in the 1980s, then narrowed in the 1990s, and finally increased again in the 2000s. He reports that the U.S. minimum wage is fully 1/3 below the French minimum wage. Of note, France's poverty rate is about 1/2 of the poverty rate of the United States. The petitioner here seeks to expand the number of employees who would be exempted from our town's living wage rate of $13.19 per hour. While this town meeting member has no objection to adding town junior recreation positions such as junior swim coach, junior referee, junior camp counselor to the group of employees who are exempted from the living wage, I strongly object to the expansion of the number of seasonal employees who would be exempted from the living wage rate under the added restrictions of the advisory committee's motion, chiefly requiring the seasonal employee to work 6 consecutive months to be eligible for the living wage rate. The very nature of seasonal work is that it can be periodic and not consecutive for 6 months. Instead, it may consist of 3 months in the winter and another 3 months in the summer. Requiring seasonal employees to work a minimum of 6 consecutive months in order for them to earn $13.19 per hour may, in effect, eliminate the town's payment of the living wage rate to many seasonal employees. In conclusion, I urge you to vote favorable action on this town meeting member's revised amendment to the advisory committee's main motion, but that if this motion fails, to vote no action on the advisory committee's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franco.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben Franco, for the Board of Selectmen. I've got to find my talking points here. The Recreation Department submitted Article 10 with the goal of making several changes to the living wage bylaw. The article as submitted would expand the employees exempted from Brookline's living wage, make it easier for departments to track seasonal or temporary employees eligible to receive the Brookline living wage, decrease the impact that scheduled increases to the state minimum wage would have on the town, incorporate human resources terms used elsewhere in the bylaws and in town materials into the living wage bylaw. The Board of Selectmen thanks the Recreation Department for proactively bringing the issues raised in Article 10 to the town meeting's attention, but cannot support the article as it was submitted. At the onset, I think it's important that the body ensures the difference between the Brookline minimum wage and the living wage, both of which were established by the living wage bylaw. The Brookline minimum wage is the lowest wage any Brookline employee can be paid today, that Brookline minimum wage is $1 more than the state minimum wage, $10 an hour. The living wage is the wage paid to lower-level town employees not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. The living wage, as we've heard, currently stands at $13.19 an hour and increases every July 1st at the same rate, same cost of living increase escalator paid to non-union town employees. The first part of the article before the body seeks to exempt junior employees paid through the Recreation Revolving Fund who perform work sporadically, as a junior skate guard in the winter or as a camp counselor in the summer, for example, from eligibility to receive the Brookline living wage and instead pay this group of employees the Brookline minimum wage. Making this change would be in line with other exemptions from the living wage currently in place. Continuing the practice of allowing junior recreation department employees who are normally between 15 and 17 years of age and working their first jobs to receive the living wage after 6 months of employment has a direct impact on the cost of operating the recreation department, $28,000 according to information the board received. This cost is passed on to recreation department program participants through higher program costs, risking pricing registrants out and limiting the ability of the department to subsidize the cost of participation by our lower income neighbors. The Board of Selectmen supports expanding the positions exempted from the Brookline living wage to include junior recreation department positions funded through the Recreation Revolving Fund. The second part of the article proposes to slightly change one of the criteria that must be met in order to receive Brookline's living wage. Currently, employees must have worked more than 6 months in a 12-month period in order to receive the living wage, assuming they are not exempted by other criteria. The Recreation Department told the board it is an administrative burden to track sporadic employees to ensure their hourly wages are increased when they have been active for more than 6 months, even if they have worked only a handful of days. The current payroll system doesn't allow for this calculation to be done automatically. And so hundreds of part-time employees who have been have to be tracked manually through both the HR and the recreation departments. Automating this process would require a system change and an investment of considerable funds. In order to address this issue, the department proposes to change the criteria to require employees to have worked at least 6 consecutive months in a given fiscal year in order to receive the living wage. The Board of Selectmen supports this change. And at this point, I'll speak to Ms. Connor's amendment. The board was presented with the Connors Amendment earlier this evening and declined to reconsider its previous vote. Part 3 of Article 10 seeks to abolish Brookline's minimum wage. The petitioner argues that because the scheduled increases in the state's minimum wage that will occur over the next several years, the current requirement that Brookline pay its employees $1 more than the state minimum wage is unnecessary. While it is true that maintaining the requirement that Brookline pay all employees at least $1 more than the state's minimum wage does have a financial cost, $12,000 per year, the board felt maintaining this requirement was necessary. Where there would be an impact on the department's bottom line, the board felt it important to recognize that lower income residents might seek positions with the town to help their families with household bills. While these employees are unlikely to be the sole breadwinner in their families, the pay they receive helps provide a measure of economic stability. Therefore, the board does not support removal of the requirement that Brookline's minimum wage remain $1 more than the state's minimum wage. Finally, the petitioners proposed to update the word seasonal used in the living wage bylaw, which they view as an outdated term. The board considered this change and initially voted against this change. However, we reconsidered earlier this evening and came into line with the vote of the advisory committee to include those new definitions in the bylaw. The Board of Selectmen, by a vote of 5-0, moves favorable action on Article 10.
Just to clarify the Board of Selectmen's position, the Selectmen support the main motion on page 10-12 as proposed by the Advisory Committee. They do not support a change that the Recreation Department would have made in Section 4.83 by deleting $1 more than the words in bold on the Advisory Committee motion. Is that correct? Okay, Mr. Gladstone.
Good evening, Scott Gladstone from Precinct 16. I think I just become a town meeting member around the turn of this century, and I volunteered to be on this moderators committee discussing the living wage. I've not since volunteered for a moderators committee. Take from that what you will. But it really was, in fact, an excellent committee made up of a diverse group of opinions. We all worked very, very hard. And we really came up with a fairly narrow living wage bylaw. We looked at much broader ones, and this is one we settled on. Towards the end of that process, as I recall, the Recreation Department came to us, explained that some of these seasonal workers were not necessarily breadwinners, and as part of many, many compromises that we made, before we came up with the living bylaw living wage bylaw that's been part of our bylaw for this past decade and more, we instituted that compromise to exempt the seasonal employees. So the bylaw that you have that we've been working under for all these years is already a compromise. And I do want to just speak to why I would urge a no vote, no action vote on this and all the amendments. There is some assumption, again, that maybe these folks are not their main breadwinners. For the same reason that the advisory board and the selectmen, I think wisely, wanted to maintain the Brookline minimum wage, which is $1 more than the state. That logic is the same with regard to the living wage. If these young people are contributing to their household funds, then they should contribute a living wage to the household funds, and not just the Brookline minimum wage. Also, I'm at a point in life where my kids are either just beginning college or getting ready for college, and I have to say that the money that they make and they save in their various jobs really does help towards those ridiculous, countless expenses. If they make less money, my family makes less money. My daughter, my son could crack up our car any day. He's actually a worse driver than my daughter. But my daughter, backing out of the driveway, just got too close to the tree, pulled the front bumper off, and she said, "Oh, I'll pay for it. I'm so sorry." And she has money saved up from jobs, here and there. But her money is our money, because when she spends her money on something like that, and then she has an expense for college or books or whatever else, well, then we have to, meet that missing chasm. And I'm sure many other families in Brookline are in the same place. So, work is work. What are we trying to teach here? We're trying to teach, I understand this idea, and the reason for the original compromise, is that a first job teaches work values. It's a good thing. We should create a situation where as many kids as possible could have these first jobs. But what are we teaching them about the value of work if we're not paying them the living wage? It teaches them that they should not be demanding a living wage when they go out into the world and have to take a job outside of the town of Brookline. And that's not a good lesson to teach anywhere in the country. And I think particularly we should not be starting that lesson in Brookline. Finally, just on a very technical point, one reason I don't agree with the exemption for these junior workers, just as one example, is junior lifeguards. Junior lifeguards are lifeguards. Junior refers to the average age. But it's the same Red Cross certification as anybody else who has the responsibility of caring for people's lives in a potentially dangerous situation. It takes a 1-week certification course all day, every day, which cost a fairly considerable amount of money just to take. And that doesn't take into account the many years of having to become proficient in swimming. So it's a multi-year commitment. It's an expensive commitment. It's a huge responsibility. And this is just one example of devaluing a piece of work that is actually quite important to society, performed by our young people or anybody else. For those reasons, I would urge no action on this warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farlow. And Marlise, would you come forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Frank Farlow, Precinct 4, speaking for Brookline PACS. As a general principle, PACS supports working people and fair wages. In the last couple of decades, that's meant, among other things, attending to the issue of the living wage. We look with skepticism on any steps that seek to reduce the wages of working people, especially those at the bottom of the scale, including adult students, many of whom carry debts their parents couldn't have imagined, and part-time employees. Article 10 would exempt employees in both of these categories from the town's living wage. Seasonal and temporary employees receive no benefits, no health insurance, retirement allowance, or workers' comp. We also don't provide the living wage to seasonal employees who work less than 6 months in any 12-month cycle, and neither the Selectmen's motion nor the Advisory Committee motion would change that. But at the top of page 1013, the Advisory Committee motion would add temporary employees to that exemption. And both the Selectmen's motion and the Advisory Committee motion would change the wording of the exemption work period for seasonal employees in such a way as to increase the number of these employees who are exempted. Now, as you've seen, the entire discussion in the combined reports is devoted to the employees of the Recreation Department. What you haven't seen, because it's not there, is that, according to our understanding, there are also a number of DPW employees who would be affected. They're in the Highway Division, which every year hires a lot of seasonal and temporary workers. Furthermore, of particular interest during this period in which the town is slowly turning its attention toward internal issues of racial justice is that that's one of the two primary locations, the other being the police department, with a disproportionate share of the town's few black employees. We've been told that the Highway Division currently contains 2 black temporary employees and 2 black seasonal employees, with more usually hired when school lets out. If this is true, the 2 temps would lose their living wage under this article. We don't know whether either of the 2 black seasonal workers would lose their living wage, or how many of the minorities who might yet be hired when school lets out would be exempted under the new work period wording proposed by the Selectmen and the Advisory Committee, because that information isn't yet available to us. So the paragraph at the top of page 1013 should be of as much concern to all of us as it is to Ms. Connors. A New York Times editorial yesterday said, "Working for the government has long been viewed by African Americans as a relatively open pathway to the middle class, but the decline in state, local, and federal employment in recent years has contributed to the struggles of black communities. There's a double disadvantage for black public sector workers.
One minute, sir.
Concentrated in a shrinking sector of the economy, and substantially more likely than other public sector workers to be without work," unquote. This is not the right historical moment for us to be moving in the direction proposed by the unamended Advisory Committee motion. For these reasons, and in the absence of a more complete explanation for the necessity for this proposal, including especially the number and race of employees in each impacted category in each impacted department, the PAC's recommendation is now as follows. Vote yes on the Connors Amendment. If it passes, vote yes on the main motion. If the amendment fails, vote no on the main motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Maralise.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Maralise, representing Precinct 6. Thanks to a report on poverty in Brookline, in the last year we have had much more emphasis on this important problem and subject. Even during the override campaign, both sides were talking about the importance of being concerned about the impact. The vote no people were pointing out what the economic burden would be on vulnerable populations. The vote yes people were pointing out the importance of an excellent education to our young people as a way of breaking the cycle of poverty. What we have here, I believe, is an example of being concerned about the dirt when we hold the broom in our hands. The broom is the living wage provision. And that's why I support the amendment that has been proposed by Ms. Connors. I know way too many people who are cobbling together temporary, part-time, seasonal jobs in order to make a full-time living. And that, for me, is reason enough to support the amendment. What I find particularly puzzling is the claim that somehow our technology cannot handle the complications of having non-consecutive periods of employment. That argument might have worked a couple of years ago, but come on, it's way out of date. We can certainly find the technology to handle that. My gym has the technology that if I miss a session, it automatically registers. Another puzzling rationale that was offered on behalf of the main motion was mushing together, that's a technical term, mushing together the performance review process with the grade of a job. I mean, it was claimed that a young person whose performance was subpar should not get an automatic increase because the job was suddenly more than 6 months. Well, I respectfully submit that a performance review is a separate subject altogether. It has absolutely nothing to do with this warrant article. That's not how you conduct performance reviews. Finally, I would urge that the impact of this warrant article be referred to the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Director so that we do know what the impact of it will be on employees of color. I don't think we have a clear picture of this warrant article, and I urge that you vote in favor of the amendment, and if the amendment doesn't pass, that you vote no action on the main motion.
Ms. Daly?
Nancy Daly from the Board of Selectmen. It was my understanding when I heard the discussion of this earlier during the warrant process that all the employees that would fit into the seasonal or temporary category in DPW are currently paid over the living wage, and so this would not affect them in any way. Do I have that right? And my second question is, I believe
Let's
that
just deal with one question at a time, Ms. Daly. Mr. Bull?
Yes, temporary employees in DPW, when they are hired, upon the point that they are hired, are paid the living wage or more.
Well, her question was, is it correct that there's nobody in the DPW who would be affected by this change in the bylaw? Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And your second question?
My second question was about the Munis package that we use to track employees, and can that be amended to easily keep track of employees at different stages? Or, I mean, why were we told that it was so difficult to track people?
Mr. Ball?
Generally, when we track people for other purposes, as far as 32B, which is when health insurance kicks in, it's for a 6 consecutive month period. And that is how our system is set up. So if we are to vary from that, which we do with the Recreation Department in particular, it is a manual process. It would cost a lot of money to change that.
Thank you. Aha. The question's been called. Is there a second? Okay, we have the following speakers signed up. Ms. Nobrega is against any change in the current bylaw. Mr. Fisher supports the Connors amendment, and you see Ms. Becker, is that correct? At the microphone. I don't know what her position is, but the motion has been made and seconded, so we will have a vote on the motion to close debate. It requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of terminating debate, please raise your hands. Those opposed? The chair is in a little bit of doubt, so we'll have an electronic vote. And by the way, speaking of electronic voting, despite the scintillating nature of our debates, town meeting members are starting to leave the auditorium. And I remind everybody to turn in your handheld device as you leave the auditorium. This is Article 10, motion for the question. Motion for the question. We are voting on the motion for the question. We are voting whether to terminate debate. A yes vote will terminate debate and will go directly to Ms. Connors' amendment. A no vote will open the floor to the, so we'll hear from the people who I've told you are signed up or standing at a mic. An abstention is an abstention. Any questions? Okay. Press 1 for a yes vote on the motion to terminate debate, press 2 on a no vote, and press 3 to abstain. The motion for the question fails by failing to get a 2/3 vote. 103 in favor, 88 opposed, and 10 abstentions. So we will hear next from Ms. Nobrega.
Good evening. My name's Mariah Nobrega, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 4, and this is my first time speaking at town meeting. Thank you. I'm proud to stand in front of you in favor of the Connors Amendment to warrant Article 10. You said I was against everything, but I'm not against everything. In favor of the Connors Amendment. So, as I sat last week, diligently reading my combined reports, Article 10 stood out to me like a sore thumb. In a warrant that's all about improving the quality of life for Brookline residents and sustaining Brookline as a community, including articles on solar energy, water sustainability, and reducing plastic waste, increasing and preserving our green space, and so on. Article 10 is about the exact opposite. Article 10 is a regressive measure which would have us take away rights and wages from the most poorly paid and therefore most economically vulnerable of our town employees. Article 10 is particularly tone-deaf given the Brookline Community Foundation's important 2014 report, Understanding Brookline, a Report on Poverty, and the significant discussion during the recent override campaign about the rising income inequality within Brookline and whether our community is becoming, or perhaps has already become, one of haves and have-nots. Tonight, we find ourselves being asked to take from the have-nots. We are being assured that the have-nots are inefficiencies and that we are actually just correcting a long-standing error. Wrong. These are people who work because they need money. We are being told that most, if not all, of the affected employees are under 18, though there is an alarming lack of clarity in the explanation as to who exactly would be affected, particularly if the clause on temporary workers were to take effect, as that may impact workers beyond the rec department, as you heard earlier. Even if these workers are under 18, we have no data or insight on the impact of this pay cut on their family income or the impact on their plans to save money for college. Please keep in mind that these affected employees are also not eligible for benefits. We are being told that the state minimum wage, which is $9 an hour right now, or even the Brookline wage, which is $10, is a sufficient pay rate for an even greater share of our town employees. Last week, a report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition found that minimum wage workers in Massachusetts would have to work 110 hours a week to reasonably afford the average two-bedroom apartment in the state. For the Brookline minimum, that goes to a mere 99 hours, and even with Brookline's living wage, these town workers would have to work 75 hours a week to live in Brookline, assuming that our rents are average. Yeah, right. But you know what? It's a start, and we cannot and we should not backslide. When the living wage bylaw was enacted in Brookline in 2001, it was at the forefront of a movement for which we are today seeing true widespread momentum across the U.S. In 2001, the findings included in the wording of the article were, town meeting finds the following. A, the wages of many workers have not kept pace with the cost of providing for themselves or their families. B, town meeting must ensure that taxpayers' dollars are used responsibly to improve the economic security and well-being of town employees. C, the town government must lead town businesses and contractors by example to engage in and support fair wage practices in Brookline. Whether in 2001 or 2015, truer words have never been spoken. I'm proud to live in a community with such a commitment to its employees. Please affirm your support for Brookline's most economically vulnerable employees and a living wage by voting yes on the Connors Amendment, and if it fails, no action on warrant Article 10.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Andrew Fisher, Precinct 13. I have very little to add to what's been said already. It's clear that this is an assault upon working-class laboring people. We've gotten used to that in today's world, but I certainly didn't expect it to come from the town of Brookline. While it may be true, as Ms. Daly posed, that no one presently will be affected. We're talking temporary seasonal workers. We're changing the definition of what a temporary and seasonal worker is in order to broaden the category of people to whom we do not need to pay a living wage. And it begs the question of if perhaps no one is being affected now, but who will be affected tomorrow? The question I have is if this is we're talking about $28,000 in the budget. We have a number of supervisory personnel who get cars. I wonder how many cars it would take to cover the wages of the not just students. It's being put on the backs of students with first-time jobs, but we're talking about day laborers. We're talking about common working people. How many how many cars that are a fringe benefit to people who make a lot more than the living wage would it take to make up the $28,000 that we're trying to take away from working class people?
Thank you. We'll take that as a rhetorical question. Ms. Becker, you've been very patient.
Thank you. I have two
Who are you?
Sorry, Josina Becker, town meeting member in Precinct 6. And I have two not rhetorical questions, which are, the first one is, what is the definition of a junior employee? There's been some references to being an age or a student and the average age, so I'm just curious, how would a 17-year-old full-time employee be treated versus myself with no lifeguarding experience? If I wanted a job, would I be, and I'm over 17, would I be a junior employee? So clarification on who we're hiring in those roles and what the standard is to meet them is the first one. Then I have a second question.
Well, I think the answer to your first one is that junior employees, positions themselves are defined by the particular positions that are spelled out after the word specifically, like junior swim coach, et cetera. Is that correct, Ms. DeBow?
Yes.
So it's experience-based, like if I wanted to become a full-time lifeguard in Belmont as a non-student over 21, I would be a junior lifeguard?
I don't know about Belmont.
I'm sorry.
But in
Belmont
Brookline,
or Brookline?
So it is a position. So it is regardless of your age. If you have no experience as a lifeguard, you would be a junior.
Okay.
Mr. Clafter?
Oh, sorry, I have one more follow-up question. It's
Okay,
about,
this is the last one.
in reference to conversations we had about merit-based increases, what is the standard operating procedure on merit-based increases? It was brought up in the advisory committee's position, and so what is that if you are a junior employee? Are there reviews in the scenario where I am a lifeguard? How am I informed about my ability for a merit-based increase?
Ms. Paredes?
Thank you. Yes, there is a very structured organization, especially for a lifeguard. Just having a certification in lifeguarding does not mean you have the skill or the experience. It really does come with maturity and in the hours put in to be a lifeguard. It is, as Mr. Gladstone said earlier, a very difficult job, and it is one that we take very seriously. So we have a very structured series of mentoring process, and we also have a full risk management system that we use at the Crane Aquatic Center, and that comes with in-house and out-of-town training as well. So there's a significant amount of training that goes along with that.
Okay, so a merit-based increase.
Oh,
merit-based increase, yes.
Okay.
The answer to your question is yes.
A training.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Yes, the gentleman, you've been also very patient. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Mark Lowenstein, Precinct 12, and I'm just wondering, it's 10:15. We've been here for 3.5 hours. We've spent the night talking about a $250 million budget and plus a $7 million override, which we congratulated ourselves on passing. So why are we now talking about $28,000 when we're having a national conversation about the living wage? We have to bring these conversations home to the dinner table. About this key issue, and I think it sends a really bad signal to our young people who we want working, and if they're working in a job and it's a responsible job, they should be paid commensurately for it. And the last thing I'd say on this is that, and I'm sure it's not the intention of those who proposed this, but we've already started to see this with Obamacare, where companies are lowering the number of working hours for employees in order so they don't have to pay for health care for their employees, and that's a sort of scope creep that could happen with something like this. Again, I'm sure it's not the intention, but it does open us up to the possibility. Thank you.
Ms. Lodish.
Thank you. My name is Pam Lodish from Precinct 14. I somehow have a different take on this, having sat through the advisory committee tonight and listened to the discussion of Patricia Connors' amendment. I think I believe in the living wage, but I don't think that that's what this is about. Somehow I'm missing the point completely. I think if we pass this amendment, there will be no jobs for our younger people, because with the living wage, with the higher amount of money, we'll be hiring college students instead of high school students. So I view this as a different perspective, and I'd like Lisa to comment on it. Having listened to the advisory tonight, because I think we are going to not, if this passes, we will hire more experienced people in those jobs, and we won't be giving our young people this opportunity.
Thank you.
Clifford Scott Nanian, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I am missing two numbers, which I don't really expect to see tonight, but perhaps if the 6 months continue. Well, I'll say that the numbers are, we've been told that it costs, quote, a lot to actually implement automated tracking of this 6-month cumulative period. I would like to know exactly how much a lot, and we've also been told it costs a lot in labor to track it manually. Both of those numbers seem very germane. I would be very interested in seeing a future budget include those numbers broken out, and then we can make an informed decision about this. Otherwise, we're asked to make a decision based on no quantitative data at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Thank
Mr.
you, Bobby
Clafter,
Allen.
you've had one bite at the apple. You'll have to wait for Mr. Allen.
I haven't said a word.
Didn't I call on you?
No.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I just have 3 quick points. I'm David Clafter, Precinct 12. 3 quick points. First of all, the one that was just made, we're spending a lot of time to save $28,000 on a $200 and some million budget. Second point, it's been argued that this is all about young people. If this was all about people under 18, put it in the article. Don't broaden it to include a whole general category. Third, we've been told that it's very difficult to track somebody working 6 months out of the previous 12 months. I would be embarrassed for the town if this were considered to be truly an obstacle to paying some of our most vulnerable citizens a decent wage. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
You ready for me now, Mr. Moderator? You ready for me now?
I'm ready for, well, I don't know. We'll ever be
Thank you,
ready
Bobby
for
Allen from Precinct 16. I think I just want to calm everybody down here. I chaired this, the Living Wage Bylaw Committee, or Moderators Committee, that Scott referred to earlier. And there were a lot of compromises. And let me tell you this, we were way out front with this. We've done a great job with this. And one of the things we recognized early on is that we needed some exceptions in this. And now what we're hearing from both HR and from our recreation director is that we need to extend some of these. I was a product of this recreation program. It wasn't so much about the money. It built some character. I had to be up on time. It gave me some great experience. I learned different things in different areas, not just in recreation. They used to have different programs back then. But what we're doing now is just a slight modification. I think we support the article. This isn't about a certain type of people. This isn't about most vulnerable people. This really affects kids. If you read the article, if you really think about it, we're talking about the kids here. And this is not a big deal. We just need to calm down, support the advisory committee, and let's move forward. Thank you.
Well, I think we're ready for a vote. And first we'll take the Connors amendment. Mr. Carroll?
I think we should have a recorded vote on the amendment.
If there are 35 town meeting members who would like a recorded vote, we'll have one. 15, 20, Just please remain standing while the chair counts you. Yes, there are 35. So we will have an electronic vote. This is on the amendment offered by Ms. Connors. The amendment would, in section 4.8.5A, revert to the present bylaw language, which is seasonal employees who work less than 6 months in any 12-month cycle. Her amendment would further delete the two definitions on page 10-14, which I think, yes, delete the two definitions on page 10-14. This is Article 10, Connors, C-O-N-N-O-R-S, amendment.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator. I think the Connors Amendment does include Section F, the definitions. Is that correct?
The Connors Amendment does not affect the addition of Section F. Is that correct, Ms. Connors? Yes.
But that still remains.
That would remain in the motion. Okay. You have 40 seconds. Press 1 for a yes vote on the Connors Amendment, 2 for a no vote, and 3 for an abstention. It's not necessary, by the way, to point your handheld device at the screen. It recognizes you even if you've put it on the floor. Motion carries by a vote of 141 to 48 with 10 abstentions. On the main motion, as amended by Ms. Connors, those in...
I think we should have a recorded vote on this one, too.
On the main motion?
On the main motion, yeah.
Well, I think all we're left with is the description in paragraph F and the addition of F to section 4.8.3, Mr. Carroll. But if there are 35 town meeting members who want an electronic vote, we will have one. And there are. This is main motion. Are we ready? Okay, the voting period is commencing. Press 1 for a yes vote, 2 for a no vote, and 3 for an abstention. This is on the main motion of the advisory committee as amended by Ms. Connors' amendment. Motion carries by a vote of 144 in favor, 42 against, and 5 abstentions. Article 11. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our usual rule is that we complete the article on which we're debating at 10:30 and then I entertain a motion to adjourn. Well, I'm not entertaining it yet, please. Let me explain what's going on. The next article is Article 11, and it relates to the establishment of a Crown and Shield Local Historic District. There are half a dozen people who would like to be heard on this article, and it would carry us, I believe, to close to 11. That said, if we don't deal with Article 11 tonight, the chances are excellent that we'll get through the balance of the warrant on Thursday evening. I don't like to make ironclad predictions, so consider this a non-ironclad prediction. But I think we'll be able to do that with a little cooperation from the speakers. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn town meeting to 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. Is there a second? Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Town meeting is adjourned until 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.